Chapter 476. Who is this man? How he can be so powerful? He looks like a devil god. How can a human be like this? The entire camp of the allied armies of Qi State had already been devastated. Yi Shiwen's one attack of the Big Bang Stardust Fist had devastated the entire big camp of the allied armies of the Qi State, and they had sustained heavy casualties as a result. Afterwards, a group of semi-sage experts were utterly defeated by his attack. Such strength had left them in despair. Consequently, they had become exceptionally afraid, and a chill ran down the spine of the surviving experts of the allied armies of the Qi State. This man is too ferocious. He had effortlessly wiped out a group of semi-sage experts. Was there genuinely a sage expert like that in the Yi Yuan school? It was impossible. They had already inquired about this before they had arrived here. The Yi Yuan school only had one sage expert, and that person was the old leader of the school. However, he had already died in a seated posture. Moreover, many people had witnessed that with their own eyes. And this matter hadn't made noise in the Great Yu State alone. In fact, it had also made a buzz in the entire 10 countries of the Southeast region at that time. After all, it was regarding the death of a sage expert. A sage expert could run amok in a country and could even be the ancestor of a region. So, they absolutely couldn't have made a mistake regarding the matter of the death of a sage expert. They had time and again verified the death records of a person like the old leader to see if it wasn't bogus. And then they felt relieved in the end. Therefore, this person before their eyes couldn't be that legendary old leader. The martial arts experts could obviously maintain their youthful appearance. However, this person clearly wasn't too old. This meant that the person who had devastated the experts of the allied armies of the Qi State was someone else. The disciples of the Yi Yuan school were cheering in excitement. Those experts of the allied armies of Qi State didn't know Yi Shiwen, but most of the disciples of the Yi Yuan school knew him. Yi Shiwen had left a profound impression on them back then. He had been a latecomer, yet he had gained the fastest speed and had become a pro-disciple. And he had then gained an illustrious fame after he had returned from the Demon Island. Everyone had initially believed that Chief Fifan possessed invincible might among his peers. He possessed an unshakable position among his peers. In fact, he held a legendary status. 10 years' time had passed in a flash, and several groups of new disciples had arrived in the Yi Yuan school during this time. These people had also been hearing about how Yi Shiwen's fame was growing slowly. However, not many people knew him still. Yi Shiwen, it's Yi Shiwen. Many disciples of Yi Shiwen's generation immediately recognized him. This group of people were his peer, and were most familiar with him among the people of the Yi Yuan school. They had seen him rising step by step to become a pro-disciple. Therefore, they were obviously touched the most. A small gap opened in the big matrix barrier of the Yi Yuan school, and Yi Shiwen went inside. Those experts of the allied armies of the Qi State didn't dare to launch an attack on him. After all, they weren't idiots. Hadn't they seen how formidable Yi Shiwen was? A group of semi-sage experts had been sent flying in the sky as soon as they collided with him, and they had sustained serious injuries as well. Therefore, they might meet their deaths if they try to provoke this powerhouse any further. Yi Shiwen saw a group of familiar faces as soon as he went inside the big matrix barrier, and the head of that group turned out to be Chu Jingkai. 10 years had passed, and Chu Jingkai looked extraordinary now. He had gotten promoted and had become everyone's chief. His principles were faintly twined around his body. He had also become a respectable expert of the semi-sage realm. However, Yi Shiwen was merely a bit surprised, nothing more. After all, Chu Jingkai had already been at the pinnacle of the half-step legendary realm back then. Afterwards, he had reversed his cultivation into the legendary realm. Therefore, his speed must have become even faster. Moreover, he had stayed in the half-step legendary realm for over 100 years. So, he certainly had a profound accumulation as well. So, his progress wasn't far from Yi Shiwen's expectations. However, his strength couldn't be compared with that of Huang Luo Chun and Shuiyin Luo, let alone with the strength of Qi Fifan and Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen also admired him secretly. After all, Chu Jingkai had chosen not to leave the Yi Yuan school at that time. His cultivation wouldn't have been comparable to Qi Fifin's at present, but it could have well been comparable to that of Huang Luoqin's and Shuiyin Luo's if had decided otherwise. His attire made it seem like he had already become the head of the Yi Yuan school. Yi Xuan saw the former head of the Yi Yuan school, Wu Patian, standing behind him. In addition, he also saw the familiar figures of the Lord of the Penalty Palace Hall and the Lord of the Merit Palace Hall. However, their attires gave an impression that they were no longer the in-charges, and the experts of the younger generation had taken over their positions. He had already seen a lot of these people back in the day. Many of them were the trusted aides of Qi Fifin. In the end, Qi Fifin had officially taken the control of the Yi Yuan school in his hands. So, having his trusted aides in the team should naturally make sense. These people wouldn't have become the puppets of the sovereign of the school if he didn't plan to assign them to the important positions. Yi Xuan couldn't help but be secretly moved. The power structure of the Yi Yuan school had been completely transferred into the hands of the people of this generation in this short period of more than a decade. It was even quicker than what he had expected. However, the younger generation had also grown up extremely quickly. A person like Chu Jingkai, who had been clearly inspired by Yi Xuan at that time, had also put more efforts into his cultivation. And he had made the breakthrough into semi-sage realm within such a short span of 10 years. He had fully demonstrated his 100-year worth of accumulation of legendary realm. Young brother Yi, I didn't expect that we would meet each other under these circumstances. Chu Jingkai's face exposed a bit of agony as he said. Both of them hadn't anticipated that they would meet in such situation. Yi Xuan had also thought that he would return to his home in glory. However, he hadn't anticipated that he would return in this kind of situation. I hadn't thought of that either, Yi Xuan replied. Sigh, I'm incompetent. I couldn't lead the Yi Yuan school on the correct path. I'm unworthy of being the leader of the Yi Yuan school. Chu Jingkai sighed. He forced a smile and said, Don't pay attention to what I say. Thanks a lot to young brother Yi for coming today and helping us out. It's not a big deal. Yi Xuan waved his hand to show that he wasn't bothered by this matter. It's not a big deal? Chu Jingkai exclaimed and said, It may not be a big deal for you, brother Yi, but was nothing less than a hopeless situation for us. Young brother Qi had sent a letter 1 year ago, and he had conveyed that you have made a huge name in the true martial university. He and Qi Fifin didn't have any conflicts. They didn't have a very friendly relationship either. However, their relation had become quite good after Qi Fifin had left. Chu Jingkai was deeply moved at this moment. Yi Xuan wasn't the only person who had gone to the true martial university, and he didn't get time to send a letter to his home. However, that didn't mean that other people didn't get the time as well. They got to know from the letters that Yi Xuan had established a big reputation in the true martial university. At least these high-level experts had come to know about it. Therefore, he was even more touched. The true martial university wasn't a small place like the Yi Yuan school. Standing out among one's peers was no big deal in a Yuan school. But one must say that Yi Xuan had outstanding innate talent because he had stood out among his peers in the true martial university. Moreover, he had also won the championship in the big competition between the 4 major forces. In addition, he had also become the top heaven's pride expert of this generation. Everyone had seen Yi Xuan's power a moment ago. A group of semi-sage experts had appeared like paper in front of him. They had been no match for him. His strength had even stunned the true martial university. It was very difficult to make the breakthrough into the sage realm in the 10 countries of the southeastern region. The semi-sage realm was considered as the peak fighting strength one could have here. However, even that didn't look enough in front of Yi Xuan. Some people may have had doubts that whether the information sent by Qi Fifin was true or false, but they had nothing to say at this time. A group of semi-sage experts had been effortlessly tidied up by Yi Xuan. So, who could say that this rumor was false? Senior brother Chu is overpraising me. Yi Xuan replied in a neither obsequious nor supercilious manner. He would often remind himself about the ancient Phoenix world, and he was still far worse in comparison. He might not be able to bring her back in his entire lifetime if he would be self-satisfied because of other people's praises. We are lucky to have you this time. Otherwise, We didn't know when we would have gotten besieged. The elder of the Merit Palace Hall opened his mouth and spoke up. Even though he had advanced to become an ancient elder of the school, but he still had a huge influence in the Merit Palace Hall. He and Yi Shiwen had shared good relations in the past. He had helped Yi Shiwen a lot in those days. So, Yi Shiwen was very grateful to him. However, the complexion of the elder of the Penalty Palace Hall didn't look very good. Everyone knew about the way his attitude had been towards Yi Shiwen at that time. He and Yi Shiwen had a big argument, especially regarding the Luo clan's matter. He had repeatedly spread rumors about Yi Shiwen, and had said that Yi Shiwen was a cruel and undisciplined person. He had further advocated that the Yi Yuan school would have to pay the price for his actions sooner or later. However, the final result had changed into this. Yi Yuan school's big protective barrier was in an imminent danger a moment ago. The enemy's big matrix formation would have possibly breached it if Yi Shiwen hadn't attacked on time. Therefore, the people of the Penalty Palace Hall were a bit nervous to see Yi Shiwen. They were afraid that Yi Shiwen would settle the previous debts this time, and they would have no other choice but to extend their necks for execution if Yi Shiwen decided to settle the debts of the past at this time. However, Yi Shiwen didn't have time to bother about these people. He went straight into the Yi Yuan school. Chu Jingkai explained the present situation of the Yi Yuan school to him on the way. Yi Yuan school had no choice but to give shelter to the personnel of the other sects of various regions while facing the attack of the allied armies of the Qi state. The said personnel, unfortunately, had to abandon their sections. However, these people were fundamentally everything. Otherwise, what would be the use of a sect if its people were dead? They clearly knew this truth. The interior of the Yi Yuan school looked as if it was already ready for war. Every floating peak was already flying. They were patrolling around the Yi Yuan school. The Qinyu Peak had been completely transformed by Yi Shiwen in the past, and it looked most glamorous among all floating peaks because it had been designed for a prototypal. So, it was a bit bigger compared to the ordinary floating peaks. And then again, it had also been reinforced by Yi Shiwen. However, those reinforcements and arrangements and so on appeared extremely childish in the eyes of the current Yi Shiwen. He could easily break them any time he wanted to. What about my father and mother? Yi Shiwen felt a bit relieved as he heard Chu Jingkai's explanation about things. So, he was mostly worried about the safety of his family members since they were present in the Qingfeng Mountain Subschool. To be continued. Chapter 477. Chapter 477. Meets friends and family again. They are fine. Chu Jingkai began to talk about them. Yi Shiwen came to know from Qi Yongkai's explanation that great changes had occurred here in the last 10 years. It wasn't that only he had progressed. Even his father Yi Kongming had been called in a few years ago and had been given the responsibility of an elder in the main sect of the Yi Yuan school. So his life was settled now. And even his elder brother and second sister had been recognized as key cultivators by the management. They were young and had already reached the small complete level of the truth realm. Yi Shiwen knew how much this change was related to himself. The Yi Yuan school was naturally going to put more effort into nurturing his elder brother and second sister after they had witnessed his outstanding performance in the true martial university. After all, even his elder brother and elder sister were outstanding talents of his generation. They certainly weren't geniuses like him. The ancient road would open again after several decades, and the true martial university would again begin to recruit new disciples. So, it wasn't that they wouldn't become outstanding experts of another generation. After all, they were still less than 50 years old. So, they still had a long way to go. Originally, he would have also participated in the recruitment test of the true martial university several decades later, just like his siblings. However, he managed to get recruited ahead of time, and nothing more. These big forces were thousands of years old, and had produced many sage experts. However, these sage experts wouldn't stay for long, and they were also unlikely to come back in the future as well. However, the successors of those sage experts had always been given special importance in the sect because the said sage experts might save the sect from calamity in the future if their successors were living in the sect. Yi Shiwen became relaxed after he came to know that his family members were fine. The Qi State's army is retreating. The Qi State's army is retreating. Someone shouted. Suddenly, the sound of disciples' clamor sounded outside, and the cheers sounded throughout the Yi Yuan school. Chu Jingkai also let out a sigh of relief. He looked at Yi Shiwen with a grateful expression in his eyes. Everyone knew that Yi Yuan school's breach was merely a matter of time if Yi Shiwen hadn't returned on time. The Yi Yuan school had been besieged second time. One could say that the enemies hadn't been prepared when they had attacked the Yi Yuan school for the first time. However, they had come prepared this time, and the Yi Yuan school had been pushed to the verge of collapse under such a disastrous attack. However, the entire Qi State's allied forces then suffered a disastrous loss under Yi Shiwen's unexpected attack. So, they had no choice but to retreat. Yi Shiwen didn't wish to chase and kill them because he knew that these people were nothing more than small goons. So, what was the point of killing these small goons if those genuine experts still hadn't been taken care of? These bastards are finally leaving. Fortunately, Senior Yi Shiwen has returned this time. Otherwise, the consequences would have been disastrous. Suddenly, several experts began to stretch their heads to look at Yi Shiwen as they clamored. They previously couldn't think of anything else because they were nervous since the Qi State's allied forces were camped outside. However, they had become relaxed at this time since the enemy forces had retreated. And they also knew that the enemy wouldn't come again for the time being. So, they were finally paying attention to Yi Shiwen en masse. Yi Shiwen was a great and legendary character for the people of this generation. He had rushed to the top by defeating countless experts in the process. He had gained outstanding achievements and fame. He had earned an illustrious reputation, not only in Yi Yuan school, but also in the true martial university. Is that really Yi Shiwen? A junior disciple asked with curiosity. Everyone had heard legends about Yi Shiwen. However, not many people had seen him in reality. Indeed, he is. Didn't you see the school head talking to him? Gee, didn't you see he looked like a god when he had broken that huge matrix formation of those Qi State's dogs a while ago? He is extremely ferocious. Someone replied with admiration. Of course, those old semi-sage experts were sent flying as soon as they collided with him. They looked like paper tigers before him. I think he may have entered the sage realm. Sage realm? Who can dare to bully us if we have a sage expert to keep watch over us? Several experts of the younger generation had become curious when they saw Yi Shiwen. In fact, they had even started to make guesses about his strength. He was too far beyond their reach. However, they still made such unscrupulous guesses. With a bit of curiosity and adoration in their tones, these people weren't like him. They and Yi Shiwen were considered of the same generation in the days of the past. In fact, some of them had even fought with him. But most of them had bitterness written over their faces. After all, they used to be his rivals at some point. However, he had matured and they looked so insignificant in front of him. Master, is that Yi Shiwen? A sturdy figure was standing far away on a mountain peak. It was a young warrior clad in a magnificent warrior's attire. He was looking at the distant crowd from that peak. Everyone had gathered around Yi Shiwen, as if he were a revered leader. Yi Shiwen would have been surprised to see this person if he were here. It was his old rival, Emohan. Emohan used to be at the small complete level of the Xiantian realm at that time. However, he had steadily entered into the truth realm in these 10 years. A young boy was standing behind him. He looked approximately 16 or 17 years old. He had become a bit curious as he looked at the crowd from afar. So he asked, "Yes, that's Yi Shiwen." Emohan nodded. He was feeling the bitter pain in his heart. He had lost to Yi Shiwen in the past. So, he had constantly put more and more effort to become stronger in his attempts to surpass Yi Shiwen. However, he had never imagined that the disparity between him and Yi Shiwen would get bigger and bigger. He had thought that Yi Shiwen would admire his progress when he would return from the true martial university. However, that didn't happen. In fact, Yi Shiwen might not even remember that he had one such rival in the past. Is he genuinely so powerful? The young boy curiously asked. He had heard countless fables regarding his legendary master, and his master had always played the role of a villain in these legends. And That was because Yi Shiwen had become a famous hero after his first fight in the Yuan school. Therefore, Emohan's name had inevitably become famous as the person who had gotten crushed by Yi Shiwen in that fight. Next to nobody had been optimistic about Yi Shiwen at that time. However, their evaluations had complete changed regarding him soon after. Ferocious. Emohan forced a smile on his face as he spoke. He was far more than just ferocious. The entire Yuan school had been sent shaking because of the Qi state's allied force, but they had been effortlessly defeated by Yi Shiwen in just one punch. Come on, let's go back. The Qi state's allied forces have withdrawn for now. However, we still have many things to do. Yi Shiwen didn't know what his former opponents were feeling in their hearts at this time. He had already arrived at the Qingyu Peak. He hadn't been accompanied by the high-level experts of the Yuan school because they had to handle other matters post the retreat of the Qi state allied forces. Young brother, you have finally returned. Yi Shiwen's elder sister arrived first to greet him as she saw him. 10 years had passed in an instant, and she wasn't a delicate and naive girl anymore. However, she was still as frank as before. Yi Shiwen's elder brother, Yi Feng, was behind his elder sister, Yi Ruxue. He was exceptionally touched when he saw Yi Shiwen. These two brothers hadn't seen each other since last 10 years. Yi Shiwen's father, Yi Kongming, and his mother, Xia Chun Shui, were behind his brother. Yi Kongming looked calm and collected. A smile had appeared on his face when he had seen Yi Shiwen. However, his faintly shivering hand had revealed that he was emotionally moved in reality. Xia Chun Shui was even more touched on the other side. In fact, she was repeatedly wiping her tears. She had always been near her younger son since his childhood. She hadn't given him birth. However, she had always treated him as her own son. And she had already counted the years for which Yi Shiwen had been away. More than 10 years in the True Martial University. And also the several years that he had spent at the main sect of the Yuan school. A total of nearly 20 years. Father, mother. Yi Shiwen promptly stepped forward and knelt down to greet them with respect. He had always had a soft corner in his heart for his family. He knew that he might never be able to return to the earth. And even if he couldn't tell how many months or years would have passed by then in Earth's time frame. His foster parents had become even more important to him as a result. And his identity, status, or strength wouldn't change that. Get up quickly. Xia Chun Shui couldn't bear it when Yi Shiwen knelt down. She promptly advanced forward and helped him up with her hands. She said, "You've become so thin." Xia Chun Shui had spoken this after she had observed Yi Shiwen carefully. He couldn't help but smile wryly in response. The experts on his level could maintain their physique for thousands of years without letting it change even a bit. Then, how could he possibly become fat or thin? One could only say that it was a mother's unconditional concern towards her son, and nothing more. Very good, very good. Yi Kongming spoke up in an emotional tone as he carefully observed Yi Shiwen. He had always been calm and solemn. However, his face had revealed a bit of emotions in this moment. This clearly showed how touched he was. Another familiar woman had been standing behind Yi Kongming and Xia Chun Shui this entire time. She was Zhang Sun Yuan. She arrived in front of Yi Shiwen and greeted him in a graceful manner. She then spoke in a melodious voice, "Accept Yuan's greetings, brother-in-law." Yi Shiwen was surprised for a moment, and he immediately looked at his elder brother, Yi Feng, and said, "You got married?" He was somewhat puzzled. He had returned to attend his elder sister's wedding. However, he didn't expect that he would hear the good news that his elder brother and Zhang Sun Yuan had gotten married as well. He already knew that the both of them were deeply in love. So, getting married was just a matter of time. It was quite important for two martial cultivators to look for a lifelong companion. The so-called companion was one of the 4 key constituents of cultivation. The other 3 were land, principles, and wealth. And they made for a very lovely young couple. It seemed as if their match was made in heaven. In fact, Yi Shiwen had been very optimistic about them even back then. Well, yeah. Yi Feng felt a bit embarrassed and touched the back of his head. "I've been married for a while now. I had heard that you were undergoing closed-door training at that time, so I didn't disturb you." Yi Shiwen had no choice but to let out a smile. A young boy and a young girl arrived behind Zhang Sun Yuan at this time. Both children weren't even 12 or 13 years old. The young boy's face exposed a heroic spirit. His forehead was quite similar to that of Yi Feng's. And the young girl was a baby face. However, she looked a bit like Zhang Sun Yuan. She was a lovely child of a beautiful mother. Yi Ning Xian. Nice to meet you, uncle. Both children walked towards Yi Shiwen and knelt down in obeisance. Yi Feng introduced them to Yi Shiwen. They were his and Zhang Sun Yuan's twin kids. They had been born more than 10 years ago, shortly after Yi Shiwen had left for the True Martial University. Yi Shiwen noticed that both kids had outstanding physical foundation and temperament. In fact, it was far better than that of his elder brothers and elder sisters when they were of this age. And he couldn't tell the difference between their current foundations and that of his own when he was at their age. They had already reached the peak strength of the Hodian realm at an early age of less than 12. They might even become Heaven's Pride experts in the future if trained properly. To be continued. Chapter 478. Yi Shiwen had never stopped because of his physical foundation and aptitude. He didn't possess extremely outstanding body foundation and aptitude. However, he had still managed to come so far. Less than 12-year-old Xiantian experts could be found everywhere in the True Martial University, let alone an evil genius like Xian Yuan Palace Hall's Pang Yangbo, who was at the semi-sage realm. However, it could also be said that 12 to 13 years old Hotian experts in the Yi Yuan school were nothing less than evil geniuses. They were much stronger than Yi Feng when he was at this age, and it was hard to guess how much stronger they were compared to Yi Shiwen when he had been at their age. Kids with such aptitude would have boundless future prospects if they were trained properly. So, it wasn't surprising that Yi Feng had introduced his kids so proudly. Good. Yi Shiwen laughed and said. He took out a chunk of dragon essence from the heavenly source mirror and said, "This is a chunk of dragon essence. Both of you can divide it into smart parts and distribute among yourselves at the time of making a breakthrough in the future. It will enormously increase the chances of your breakthrough." This was Yi Shiwen's remaining stock of the dragon essence. It could do far more than merely increasing the chances of making a successful breakthrough. In fact, it could guarantee a successful breakthrough if used by a Hodian expert. Younger brother. Yi Feng hastily stopped Yi Shiwen and said, "It is an extremely precious item." "It's nothing." Yi Shiwen shook his head and said, "I am just giving them gifts for the first meeting." A dragon essence wasn't of great use to Yi Shiwen anymore. However, it would be an enormous treasure for Yi Ning and Yi Ning Xian. Yi Shiwen cared about his family the most. So, this was nothing for him. "All right then, you can accept it." Yi Feng wasn't a pretentious person, so he didn't continue to haggle over this issue. "Thanks, third uncle." The two kids spoke in unison. Both of them were educated and well-mannered, just like Yi Feng from back then. This made Yi Shiwen dote on them even more. Many senior members of the Qinyu faction had also become excited. So, they had also gathered around Yi Shiwen apart from his family members. The Qinyu faction had progressed smoothly in these years. The Yi Yuan school had also agreed to push for their development. However, these people knew that these things had happened because of Yi Shiwen. He had showed outstanding performance in the True Martial University, and they had received great benefits because of this. It was the so-called case of getting benefits of being close to an influential person. Yi Shiwen also distributed great amounts of immortality pills. He often lacked spirit energy. However, he never lacked immortality pills. He had obtained great amount of heavenly treasures in the last 10 years or so, and a lot of them had been refined into pills by him. In fact, he had personally refined several immortality pills back when he was in the Truth Realm. However, these pills weren't of great use for the current Yi Shiwen. Therefore, he had decided to distribute them. Oh my god! This is the legendary 9-speed spirit pill. It can instantly restore one's real elemental energy. It's like having more than one life for me. There are also the 7 Revolution Soul Gathering pills. I've heard that this item can blow life into a dead body. Is it true? Senior Brother Yi is very generous. I had only heard about these elixirs. I hadn't seen them until now. The disciples of the Qinyu faction cheered after obtaining so many immortality pills. These pills were of no use for Yi Shiwen. He had also refined some high-quality immortality pills which were useless to him now. However, these were rare treasures for these people. After all, the Yuan school wasn't a colossus establishment. So, most of the resources were inclined only towards the true disciples. Many disciples of the Yuan school had become very envious of these disciples of Qinyu faction as they saw them obtaining these pills from afar. The Qinyu faction had certainly obtained Yuan school's support for development because of Yi Shiwen. However, they had still maintained the rules which they had fixed at the time when Yi Shiwen had established it. So, they still hired only elites. In fact, it was quite difficult for an average person to get recruited. Therefore, they still had around 1,000 people only, even after 10 years of development. The only change which had occurred in these years was that only the elite experts at small complete level of Xiantian realm were eligible to become a member of the Qinyu faction. There were others who also wanted to join. However, they didn't have a chance. So, they all regretted why they didn't join the Qinyu faction at that time. They wouldn't have had to watch these people of Qinyu faction obtain such great benefits from the sidelines if they had joined the faction as well. Then, Yi Shiwen did the most surprising thing. He grabbed the spirit energies from the sky with some unfathomable power and majestically instilled it into the Qinyu peak. Suddenly, a lot of disciples who were stuck at the bottleneck and were unable to make the breakthroughs took the advantage of this golden opportunity and began to make breakthroughs one after another. This was an extremely rare opportunity for them. Many disciples of the Qinyu faction had suddenly begun to make breakthroughs. Even people like Yi Kongming weren't an exception either. The spirit energies were present in ample amount on the Qinyu peak since the beginning. And Yi Shiwen also had done a lot of preparations before he had left. However, how could that old Yi Shiwen be compared with the current one? The current Yi Shiwen had straightaway grabbed the spirit energies and had placed them here. Yi Shiwen's cultivation level realm had reached the intermediate stage of the semi-sage realm, and his strength could be compared with that of a peak expert of the initial stage of the sage realm. So, there was obviously no comparison between the current Yi Shiwen and the old one. Everyone sat cross-legged and began to make breakthroughs since they had obtained such a rare opportunity. Master! A figure suddenly arrived flying from afar. He was dressed up in a scholar's attire. His entire body had a scholarly air to it. It turned out to be that book demon, Yi Shu, whom Yi Shiwen had freed. Yi Shu was very excited to see Yi Shiwen. After all, Yi Shiwen had returned after 10 years. He was very grateful to Yi Shiwen. After all, he would have still been a small book demon struggling inside that library and fighting for his survival if Yi Shiwen hadn't brought him out. How he could have obtained the prowess he now possessed if Yi Shiwen hadn't done that. His status on the Qinyu peak was second only to the Yi family. He was the leader appointed by Yi Shiwen. The disciples of Qinyu faction also had a huge respect for him. However, he hadn't thought of having such life in the past. His demonic body was a book written on loyalty. His personality and character was derived on the characteristics described in this book. This was the reason why Yi Shiwen was also assured that he could entrust Qinyu in his capable hands. You seem to have worked hard this entire time. Yi Shiwen nodded. He then let out a smile and spoke. No, not at all. I haven't worked hard. Yi Shu promptly shook his head and replied. How could the life he had lived in the last 10 years be considered as exhausting in comparison to his life before? The people of the Yuan school saw that several formidable auras were fluctuating on top of Qinyu Peak. After all, several hundred people were making breakthroughs together in one day. Yi Shiwen had also returned from outside. Moreover, the news that he had brought great amounts of immortality pills for helping the disciples of Qinyu faction in making breakthroughs had spread throughout the Yuan school at a very fast speed. And this had increased Yi Shiwen's importance even more in Yuan school. In fact, this had made him even more of a legend. Everyone had seen that a great expert like Yi Shiwen was there to keep watch. Even the Qi State's invasion had been thwarted for the time being. So, They were a bit relaxed since they had such a great expert to keep watch. Yi Shiwen met the man with whom his elder sister was going to get married. He looked like an ordinary young man. He possessed strength of truth level. He certainly wasn't the most glamorous one among the many truth-level disciples of the Yuan school. Yi Shiwen had learnt that this man had chased his sister for 10 years and had managed to arouse some feelings inside her after his non-stop attempts. So, Yi Shiwen was also quite happy for his sister. The so-called, it is easy to find priceless treasures and quite difficult to get a lover. The news that Yuan school had managed to stop the Qi state's allied force had spread widely, and it had caused a huge sensation throughout the 10 countries of the southeast region. Everyone knew that more than half of the southeast region had collapsed under the formidable offensive of the Qi state's allied forces. Several countries which were outside the territory of the Qi state had surrendered to them. However, they had only surrendered on the surface since the Qi state had risen extremely quickly in recent times. However, these countries hadn't made genuine surrenders. However, the Qi state had swept away the other countries at a very fast speed, and no country had been able to stop them in such a short time. However, the Qi state had to suffer loss whilst facing the Yuan school in the Great Yu state. Moreover, many of their semi-sage experts had gotten defeated in one breath. Yi Shiwen's name had become very famous in the 10 countries of the southeast region. A dozen of more semi-sage experts had appeared like weaklings in front of him, and they had sustained serious injuries by one move of his. Such strength had scared everyone. The situation had appeared rather clear initially, but it had gradually changed and had become blurred. The imperial capital of the Great Yu state had been surrounded by the army in large numbers. The city's matrix formation was already on the verge of a collapse. Two figures were fighting fiercely in the sky above the imperial capital. Rumble! One of them was clad in an imperial robe. He was skinny and had white beard and mustache. His face exposed pain and suffering. His robe was drenched in blood. One of his hands had been broken and rendered useless. His opponent was a young man clad in red-colored robe. He possessed blade-like, sharp facial features. His eyebrows were sharp and stretched into his temples like a pair of swords. His dark red pupils exposed a crazed look. He let out a strange, demonic smile from the corner of his mouth. Both of them were sage experts in reality. Big black chunks of space had been cracked open in the sky by their stunning fight. It was a terrifying scene to watch. Old man, I'd given you an opportunity, but you didn't give it importance. So die. That red-robed young man laughed in a frantic manner. He then unleashed the red-colored star power from his hands. The old man in the imperial robe couldn't withstand such force. His protective layer of real elemental energy got ripped apart by this attack. His body couldn't resist it and got split into two halves in the air. And the shower of blood swirled about. Ancestor! Countless experts of the imperial clan shouted in grief. This man was their biggest hope. He was also their hidden trump card, a senior expert of the sage realm. The imperial clan of the Great Yu state had stood steadily in the region for so many years because they secretly had the support of this sage expert. However, they helplessly watched him being cut into two halves in the sky at this time. Their only hope had been ripped apart, and they felt that the entire world had landed into darkness. The red-hot blood splashed out on the face of that red-robed young man. But he didn't feel disgusted by this. On the contrary, he seemed pleased in a crazy way. In fact, it seemed as if he was enjoying the taste of blood. His dreadful blood-red aura suddenly surged out of his body and swept across the entire imperial capital. To be continued. Chapter 479. Bang! The dreadful and bloody energy swept across. The entire space fluctuated, and ripples proliferated in all directions. The endless void had been ripped apart in a flash like a picture scroll. It looked extremely frightening. Massive scarlet waves swept out. Everyone in the imperial capital had a very depressing feeling in their hearts. So much so that they wanted to vomit blood. Guys, we must go all out. We anyway don't have a way out. This young master in blood-red clothes is a lunatic. He will slaughter everyone if he manages to capture the city. Someone shouted loudly. This young master in blood-red clothes was quite famous in the entire southeast region. He would slaughter the entire city whenever he appeared in the battlefield, especially if the opposite party dared to resist. In fact, many forces had surrendered because of the fear of getting slaughtered by this crazy killing machine. This so-called young master in blood-red clothes was indeed a lunatic. So, it would be of no use to surrender afterwards since he would slaughter everyone in the city if they showed any resistance. Everyone in the imperial capital stood united at this time. All of them knew that it would be a dead end for them if this person managed to capture the city. And they wouldn't get a single chance of survival if that came to happen. One must know that this young master in blood-red clothes was fighting alone at this time. However, he had several million soldiers of the Allied forces stationed behind him. The crumbling defensive matrix formation of the imperial capital had once again gotten some support since everyone had gotten united. Then, a myriad of divine tools shot up in the sky in quick succession and headed towards that young master in blood-red clothes. And a grandiose wave of divine tools was formed as a result. It blotted out the sky and covered the earth. It was overwhelming, and its influence could scare a person. The murderous auras surged up into the sky, and endless clouds got torn apart. Qi Gaoyang was also one in this united group of thousands of warriors. He was merely an expert at the pinnacle of Xiantian realm. So, the people of the imperial capital didn't consider him as a formidable expert either. However, he didn't have any other option at this time. His family and friends were behind him. So, he didn't have any other way. The entire city would be slaughtered if they got defeated. He nervously looked on as that massive wave of divine tools filled the entire sky. The success or failure was hinged on this one attack, and he couldn't afford to lose. However, that blood-red clothed young master didn't even look fazed in the face of this attack. He snorted coldly and suddenly stamped his foot. Then, scarlet ripples emerged one after another and proceeded to crash into the incoming divine tools. Murderous aura flickered in those divine tools as they released the divine beams. These beams then condensed into a group and pounded on those layers of ripples one after another. However, that young master in blood-red clothes hadn't even moved back. He had merely taken a single step and had managed to produce these ripples which had come to collide with those divine tools. Bang! 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 Those divine tools were shattered at first impact by his scarlet ripples, as if they were made of glass. They broke down into small pieces and disintegrated in their entirety. Poochie! 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 Countless experts in the imperial capital spouted blood from their mouths in quick succession. Those divine tools had been interlinked with their minds. So, these people were also affected when those divine tools shattered. Qi Gaoyang's entire body shivered violently. He felt a strange taste in his mouth. Then, he spouted blood from his mouth as well. And everything became fuzzy before his eyes. It seemed as if he had sustained serious injuries, and he fell down as a result. The attack wasn't directly aimed at him. However, it had carried an extremely terrifying force. The scarlet ripples grew more and more thick. Even the pseudo-sage tools had begun to break. Thick layers of blood clouds formed in the sky above the imperial capital. It looked exceptionally frightening. The blood-red clothed young master sneered, audacious. The bloody clouds became even thicker under his feet. Blood-red lightning was also brewing and flickering inside the clouds. Rumble! Seemingly endless blood and energies condensed into blood spears inside those bloody clouds and swept down. And countless people in the imperial capital were nailed to the ground by those blood spears. The entire imperial capital had been densely covered with blood spears in a split second. Loud screams reverberated everywhere. And the people of the imperial capital had been killed within a split second. Everyone had been killed in a flash. The semi-sage experts had been no exception to this. They couldn't escape either. A powerful sage expert was enough to suppress an entire area in the southeast region. A terrifying strength had vividly manifested on the body of that young master in blood-red clothes. The Sage Realm was the beginning of transcending the mortal world and becoming an extraordinary expert. Therefore, Sage experts were significantly different from the experts at lower levels. The essence and blood of those people had been absorbed by those blood spears. Afterwards, those spears converged back inside those blood clouds below that man's feet. Then, the blood clouds fluxed into his body. He seemingly felt very comfortable as the blood-red rays of light emitted from his body. In fact, they faintly looked like blood-red scales. However, his cheerful expression suddenly turned sinister and dreadful at this time, and his aura had flourished even more. "Young brother, there's a bad news." The blood-red clothed young master was still enjoying those scarlet energies. However, an old man clad in black clothes suddenly arrived, treading on a rainbow light. "The people who had gone to the Yuan school have failed. I've heard that a powerful person has arrived there." That old man was clearly older than the young master in blood-red clothes. However, he still willingly saluted to the young master. He might be a powerful sage expert. That old man thought for a moment before he added, "Sage realm?" The face of that young master in blood-red clothes exposed a strange and demonic smile. In fact, his smile looked a bit crazed and twisted. How much blood and essence do these ordinary people have? However, killing a sage expert will be equal to killing 1 billion of these ants. I thought it would be better if we could kill them as soon as possible. Our Chi State's army has certainly acquired a lot of area. However, we still have lesser time. These people are far from truly surrendering to us, and those secretly ambitious people may retaliate if we get slowed down here," that old man said worriedly. "And it will be a big trouble for us if some remnant old sage experts return back." He was certainly worried. The big forces of other countries also had the support of sage experts, just like their Chi State. Those sage experts would often travel outside. However, this didn't mean that they didn't care. It was only that they were thousands of miles away from their homes, and the Chi State had caught them off guard this time. The Chi State would gain influence over the entire southeast region if they could pacify the entire southeast region rather quickly. Those old sage experts may return at some point, but the Chi State wouldn't be in a difficult situation if they were able to achieve this target. In addition, they also had a lot of sage experts here, so they didn't need to worry. However, those sage experts would get the news, and they would quickly return if the Chi State's footsteps were to get obstructed here. And the consequences would be too disastrous in that case. There's nothing to be afraid of. In fact, it's good that they have happened to rebel at the right time. I want to perfect the dark spirit blood emperor power technique. And I still lack a lot of essence and blood. I was only worried that I wouldn't get an excuse to kill them. That young master in blood-red clothes let out an evil smile and said, "Anyway, these ordinary mortals are like ants. It doesn't matter how many of them are killed. I will kill those old fogies of sage level if they dare to return. And my martial power will advance by leaps and bounds after I've killed several sage experts. Then I will prevail over everyone in the sex big competition when the time comes. And I wouldn't need to see that bastard's face after that happens. That bastard's origin and aptitude are worse than mine. Why has everything been pressed upon my head?" That young master in blood-red clothes spoke up. It wasn't clear where his train of thoughts had drifted while he was speaking these words. That old man who was beside him had become somewhat embarrassed. He didn't know how to interact with him. "I am going to humiliate that bastard after I've perfected the dark spirit blood emperor power technique. And I want you to see whose performance is best. Who deserves to be the heir?" The complexion of that young master in blood-red clothes had turned grim as he had continued. "Come, follow me. Mobilize the army. Let's go to that Yuan school. We won't leave anyone alive on the way either. I want that guy to come out and beg me for death in person." The news of Imperial Capital's collapse had spread throughout the entire Great U State in a flash. It obviously caused a huge sensation in the entire southeast region. And this suddenly overshadowed the sensational news of Yi Shiwen's return as well. Everyone had been slaughtered in the entire imperial capital. No one had been left alive. Moreover, the essence and blood of those people had been absorbed, and their corpses had been left in an extremely ugly condition. However, some people had seen this fight from afar on that day. It had happened very quickly and had been accomplished very easily. The imperial capital's defense couldn't withstand for long. The sage expert of the imperial clan of the Great U State had been ripped apart. He simply didn't have the power to fight back. Suddenly, the entire southeast region had become frightened because of this. No one could picture this news in their head. After all, a sage expert was unable to save a city, and this news began to spread out next day. The Blood Spirit sect had been hesitant at first. However, they had almost immediately surrendered to the Chi State's allied forces. The Great U State had 5 big forces. The Heavenly Wind Hall and the Blood Spirit sect had already surrendered to the Chi State's army. The Imperial clan and the Drifting Cloud City had been collectively slaughtered. In fact, their orthodox teachings had been severed as well. So, only Yuan School was left now. In everyone's opinion, a weak force like the Yuan School couldn't stop the footsteps of the Chi State's allied forces. It didn't matter even if they had a sage expert to keep watch. The Imperial clan of the Great U State had a sage expert as well. However, everyone had seen what happened in the end. They had been slaughtered to the last man. Moreover, the Chi State's allied forces had several sage experts. How would one person be able to compete with so many people? It would be like courting death. The forces of those countries who hadn't surrendered yet had begun to leave. They had only 2 options, either to surrender to the Chi State's allied forces or to leave the southeast region and go to some other place. They could also take refuge in true Martial University if they wanted. They might lose their thousands-of-year-old power and influence as a result, but it would still be better than getting slaughtered. Many sects that didn't wish to become Chi State's pawn or didn't wish to get slaughtered had begun contacting the other forces outside the Southeast region. Southeast region was the entire world for ordinary people. However, it was a different matter for these deep-rooted forces. And then, another bad news spread out soon after that. The Chi State's army had arrived. Moreover, they had slaughtered everyone on the way. Initially, the Chi State's army had slaughtered everyone in those areas where they had faced resistance. And those who had surrendered to them in the beginning had been spared. However, things had changed now. The Chi State's army had started to massacre indiscriminately in order to increase the pace of their march. So, they would slaughter everyone who would come in their way. There was no reason or logic behind this massacre. And everyone had begun to tremble with fear at the thought of this. Many people even decided to fight till the last drop of their blood. After all, they were going to die regardless of whether they would resist or not. Then, another news was transmitted by the Chi State's allied forces. They would continue to slaughter people unless Yi Shiwen would agree to come out alone, with his hands tied and ready to die. To be continued. Chapter 480. The high-level experts of the Qinyu faction had gathered inside the discussion hall of the Qinyu faction. This hall was located on the Qinyu Peak, and they were discussing about the measures that should be taken to deal with the current situation. They have adopted a very malicious strategy. Yi Feng pounded his fist on the table and said. He looked extremely angry. Everyone could see what they were up to. They wanted to force Yi Shiwen to come out and seek his death voluntarily, since it would take too long for that sage expert to reach the Yuan school and kill everyone at his current marching speed. They obviously hadn't arrived yet. In fact, they were advancing at a leisurely pace and were whimsically killing anyone that happened to appear in their way. Wouldn't these people hate the Qi allied forces when their time would come? They would. However, they would hate Yi Shiwen even more. They would think that Yi Shiwen was the reason for this calamity, since he had attracted the enemies. However, they had forgotten that it would have been very difficult for them to escape this killing spree, irrespective of Yi Shiwen's choices. Such was the psychology of ordinary people. They want to force young brother Yi to come out and seek his death voluntarily. Yi Rushue's small face had turned serious as she spoke. Yeah, more and more news is coming that many people have started to blame young brother Yi for this situation. They want him to go and beg for forgiveness. Yan Qiling's complexion turned dignified as he added. He had been the in charge of Qinyu faction's management this entire time. His presence had also become very strong because of this. In fact, it was very similar to that of a powerful person. So, there was obviously a difference between his current personality and the one he possessed when he was younger and relatively inexperienced man. These people should die in a merciless manner. Yi Shu spoke in anger. He believed that Yi Shiwen was the most gracious person one could ever find. And these people had dared to criticize Yi Shiwen? It was nothing less than suicide in his opinion. Did everyone think that these people were stupid? No, they weren't stupid. And it wasn't that they didn't know the difference between right and wrong either. They were merely afraid of getting killed by the Qi allied forces. They couldn't dare to oppose the Qi allied forces. So, they could only dare to blame someone who stood on their own side. And Yi Shiwen had been deemed responsible for this disastrous situation as a result. Yi Shiwen was sitting on the throne of the Lord. He was silent. He had also heard some of those criticisms. However, he hadn't paid any attention to them. He wasn't a pedantic person who would give value to these small issues. And he wasn't someone who would willingly go and seek death because of the criticisms of those people. These people would accuse him more and more as time would progress. However, he wouldn't agree with them. He instead believed that the best option was to kill that blood-red-clothed young master. And this was also the best method to give a tight slap in the faces of those people. Yi Shiwen had gradually heard some of the matters surrounding the Qi allied force during these days. So, he had also developed some idea about them. The Qi state's army hadn't been so powerful at the start. However, it had been said that the Qi state's sage expert had returned, and he had brought several sage experts along with him. And the most famous among them was that blood-red-clothed young master. But nobody knew his name, so they simply called him the blood-red-clothed young man. People would consider themselves fortunate if they were attacked by the other sage experts. But this blood-red-clothed young master had slaughtered entire cities wherever he had appeared. Moreover, he had done it without any hesitation. It seemed as if he was practicing some evil power technique, and it appeared as if he would use other people's blood and essence for carrying out his practice. It was reported that he was at the initial stage of the sage realm. However, he possessed extremely tyrannical strength. In fact, an ordinary expert of the initial stage of the sage realm couldn't stand up to him. That sage expert of the imperial clan had been torn apart by him. Moreover, he had several sage experts by his side. But Yi Shiwen was all alone, so things didn't look optimistic for him. The opposite party wanted to exploit this volatile situation. In fact, they might even be considering that they would focus everyone's hatred on Yi Shiwen after the post-war domination of the Great Yu state. Time would gradually come to pass, and everyone would gradually begin to believe that Yi Shiwen was the one responsible for this disaster. Those traitors of the Heavenly Wind Hall and the Blood Spirit sect are definitely trying to add fuel to the fire by inciting a rebellion against Yi Shiwen. Yan Qiling spoke with a trace of extreme anger in his tone. These five big forces had always been vigilant of each other. However, they also had each other's cooperation. In fact, they would often join hands against the foreign forces. But this rumor had spread far and wide in such a short time, and that wouldn't have been possible unless these two forces hadn't cooperated. This was the so-called the mighty dragon is no match for the native serpent on its hunting ground. The Qi allied forces undoubtedly had tyrannical strength. However, they still weren't as powerful as the local forces when it came to such matters. It seems that we will have to punish the culprits in order to give warning to the others. We must uproot those who are most excited and are willing acting as the pawns. Yi Shiwen callously suggested. The Qi allied forces were quite formidable, and that blood-red-clothed young man was extremely tyrannical. However, it seemed that the people who were jumping in excitement had forgotten that Yi Shiwen wasn't a weakling either. Let's find the people who are the most excited about this rumor, and then let's kill them. Yi Shiwen stood up from his throne as he spoke in a strong voice. Being manipulated by the enemy at each and every step wasn't the solution. And Yishuan didn't care about the criticisms of those stupid people. In fact, these rumors had helped him to come up with another idea on the contrary. The Qi coalition had a reputation of an allied army because various forces had joined them. In fact, some among those entities were willing to throw their lives for the sake of the Qi state. However, some of them had been forced to join the coalition. Therefore, they must expose the people who had joined the Qi coalition willingly. And they must punish the said people to set an example for others. The rest of the things would become very simple after that. Hand over this task to me. Yin Qiling vouched for this task by beating his chest. He was certainly much inferior to Yi Shiwen in terms of strength. However, his familiarity with the local information networks was much better than Yi Shiwen's. Anyway, there wasn't enough time to gather this information. Yi Shiwen raised his head and looked up at the sky. His facial expression looked firm. More than 10 streamers of light streaked across the sky over the Yuan school a few days later. A few people arrived, and the Yuan school turned lively once again. That was because the people who had arrived were none other than the disciples of the true martial university. Moreover, they were being led by Qi Fifan. Yi Shiwen had sent a letter to Qi Fifan after he had saved the Yuan school from getting besieged. And Qi Fifan and the others had finally arrived as well at this time. In addition, many of the former powerful disciples of the Yuan school had also arrived this time. Huang Luoqin and Shuiyin Luo were amongst them as well. Qi Fifan had also made a huge progress in these years, just like Yi Shiwen. In fact, he had already entered the sage realm. Yi Shiwen had tyrannical strength, and he could even take down an outstanding expert who went against the heaven's will. However, it was countless times more difficult for him to make the breakthroughs when compared to an ordinary person. A mysterious old man clad in black clothes was also present there. He had an obscure aura. In fact, the depth of his aura was unfathomable. Even Yi Shiwen couldn't see through his cultivation level. Qi Fifan mentioned that this old man was an elder of the metropolis Martial Peak. He had specially been assigned to Qi Fifan for the sake of his protection. This old man would cultivate with Qi Fifan under normal circumstances. However, he could also protect Qi Fifan when required. Yi Shiwen sighed with emotion. The metropolis Martial Peak had a very profound and dreadful background. After all, it was the inheritance of the Supreme Lord himself. Moreover, an extremely profound sage-level elder had been assigned to protect a disciple. Such generosity wasn't available to everyone in the sect. Then, the thought about his own hidden star peak appeared in his mind. It only had a few disciples. However, he didn't think about it any further. He didn't know whether he should even ask or not. In fact, he couldn't think of anybody whom he could invite. However, Yi Shiwen was mostly surprised to see Yang Wenjun and Deng Shuixian. Both of them had become tired of staying at the Hidden Star Peak since they had hardly gotten an opportunity to come out of it. Therefore, they immediately came along with Qi Fifan when he asked them. Presently, there were 5 sage experts present in the Yuan school as a result. And this count included Qi Fifan since he had already entered the initial stage of the sage realm. Moreover, Huang Luoqin and the other semi-sage experts were also present. So, they probably weren't any lesser in number when compared to the team of that blood-red-clothed young master. The high-level experts of the Yuan school became exceptionally excited when they heard this news. The Yuan school had been shrouded in a very sorrowful mood for some time. In fact, even the presence of an expert like Yi Shiwen who possessed divine powers couldn't make any difference in their mood. He was undoubtedly very ferocious. However, he was alone. How he could contend against several sage experts? However, things had changed now since many sage experts had arrived. So, their confidence had increased enormously as well. Everyone thought that southeast region was only a small portion of the southern region, and couldn't possibly have more sage experts than the true martial university. The true martial university obviously had many sage experts. It was just that the true martial university didn't wish to interfere in the disputes among these countries. After all, the true martial university wasn't seeking worldly dominance. Moreover, The country that would win and gain the top position would have to give ample resources to the true Martial University. Therefore, the true Martial University didn't care who was at the top. The true Martial University didn't wish to interfere. However, they didn't stop their disciples from interfering either. After all, the ways of the world is always hard to avoid. A huge pile of bonfire had been ignited late at night on top of the full moon peak. This peak was located in the depths of the Yuan school. A huge flood dragon was hanging on a rack above that bonfire. Its skin had been peeled off, and it was being roasted on the rack. The yellow-colored fat was constantly dripping into the huge bonfire, and the pitter-patter crackling sound would be heard whenever those drops of fat would fall into the bonfire. Yi Shiwen had killed this young flood dragon on the ancient road. It had merely been a young flood dragon at that time. However, it had the body of a fully grown dragon. So, it was very huge. It had frozen when Yi Shiwen had put it into the heavenly source mirror. So, it was still fresh. In fact, it seemed as if Yi Shiwen had killed him only recently. Everyone was drinking and having fun because of this rare get-together. But how they could get drunk considering their martial power. So, they were drinking even more fearlessly. However, nobody was aiming to get drunk since that would be nonsensical. After all, they weren't drunkards. Moreover, there was something important going on in their bodies. And they might botch this process if they got drunk. Gee, I hadn't thought that I would get to eat a flood dragon's meat in my entire lifetime. Deng Shui Xin was holding some unknown divine tool in her small hand. She cut apart a piece from the huge body of that flood dragon and put it into her mouth. And she let out a wah-wah sound as she put that sizzling hot piece of meat into her mouth. However, she still didn't wish to stop chewing. She had unknowingly revealed her foodie nature at this time. Everyone nodded in unison. Flood dragons hadn't vanished from this world, much unlike the real dragons. However, they were still quite rare. So, it was hard to find them, let alone eat their meat. Anyway, it wasn't as if these people were eating donkey's meat. After all, wasn't a flood dragon a dragon too? It must be mentioned that such frightening creatures took birth in the legendary realm, and they could easily surpass the great sage realm after they had reached adulthood. In fact, a fully grown flood dragon could turn the entire southern region upside down. But it was nearly a creature from the legends. Several other people also began to attack the meat when they saw this. That flood dragon's body was quite huge. It was enough to satisfy everyone's hunger. In fact, some of it might still be left after that. It could be said that the so-called semi-sage or sage experts might not get another opportunity to eat a flood dragon's meat. So, nobody wanted to miss this chance. Yi Shiwen couldn't help himself either. He too ate to his heart's content. His taste buds suddenly felt different. The flood dragon's meat contained a great amount of vitality, and it could clean people's meridians. To be continued. Chapter 481. Chapter 481. Kill those who are most excited. The vitality of a young flood dragon of legendary realm wouldn't have a big effect on the current Yi Shiwen. However, it would have astonishing effects an expert below the legendary realm, or even an expert of the legendary realm. His niece and nephew unceasingly emitted clear energies from their bodies after they ate mouthful of oil and meat. They had gotten the access and control over their meridians within no time. Then, their meridians opened up, and they advanced into the Xiantian realm. Yi Shiwen had no choice but to sigh with emotion. He never had such a good opportunity back then. He had to work hard and had made many plans for obtaining the Xiantian Dawn in order to enter the Xiantian realm. Perhaps this is what we call the younger generation reaps fruit from the trees which were planted by their ancestors. However, he didn't dislike this thing. After all, hadn't he also enjoyed so many of such small benefits? For example, how could he have practiced the Xiantian cultivation technique, bright jade technique, if he didn't have a father who was an elder? Young brother, you will have to kill several such flood dragons for me in the future. Of course, it would be better if you can kill real dragons. Deng Shui Xin spoke while eating a mouthful of greasy meat. Yi Shiwen suddenly broke into cold sweat. What the hell is this request? Kill several of them? I was lucky that I had encountered a young flood dragon then. I might have been chased and hunted down if it were an adult dragon. It wasn't a sensible idea, to say the least of it. However, it seemed as if Deng Shuixan had spoken this in a careless manner. She then began to talk to his older sister in a passionate manner. Her temperament was similar to that of his sister's. So, she had become friends with his sister quite quickly, and was now talking to her rather energetically. However, she was talking with a pure heart and wasn't speaking any empty words. There are men who hit it off even when they see each other for the first time, and they help each other even though they have just met. Then, why couldn't the same be true for women? The high-level experts of the Yuan Peak would eat the flood dragon's meat, and would then exercise their martial power to digest it. Most of them had the profound strength of T legendary realm. So, it wasn't that they would explode from the excess of energy. However, their complexions had turned ugly in their attempts to containing the burst of energy. They had seen sage experts, and that was something they couldn't see on a normal day. They considered a sage expert to be some sort of a god. However, these sage experts were also yelling and fighting over the meal at this time. It seemed as if they weren't different from these other people. They knew that one wouldn't care about gods or demons after having cultivated to such an extent. And they also knew that sage experts were far more powerful than them. However, it wasn't useful even if they knew this, because they couldn't reach this realm. A sage expert had such dreadful fighting strength that even one such expert could easily force a country into submission. So, the higher-ups of the Yuan school didn't have any choice but to be vigilant. However, that old man clad in black clothes didn't seem interested in all this. He was keeping watch over Chief Fifan and didn't seem to be moving. People tried to persuade him, but he didn't touch the flood dragon's meat. Chief Fifan had mentioned that this old man was the servant of the Supreme Lord's family when he used to be a kid. Afterwards, he had entered the true martial university along with the Supreme Lord. He had been loyal and devoted since the beginning. Therefore, he had been sent with Chief Fifan's group this time. However, this also showed how much the Supreme Lord cared about Chief Fifan. This was a big reason behind the fact that Chief Fifan's cultivation had made unceasing breakthroughs in such a short time. Yi Shiwen was somewhat envious of his status. He thought about the Hidden Star Peak. It only had a very few disciples. He wouldn't have entered the Hidden Star Peak if there had been any margin for a different option at that time. And he might have been in a different situation today if that had come to happen. Young Yi, what are you planning to do? Chief Fifan had become angry when he had seen the miserable situation of the Yuan school and the Great Yu State. He wasn't an outsider like Yi Shiwen. He had been born and brought up in the Great Yu State. Therefore, his sentiments for the Great Yu State were beyond Yi Shiwen's imagination. They're not interested in a direct and decisive battle. So, we will also accompany them in this game and have fun. Yi Shiwen coldly replied, we will eliminate those who are most excited. We must first uproot the most loyal pawns they have gathered. And Chief Fifan also harbored deep hatred for those pawns of the Qi Coalition. Time passed day by day, and the Qi Coalition was still slaughtering everyone. In fact, they slaughtered the entire cities and villages wherever they went. That blood-red-clothed young master was also practicing the evil technique, and he needed time to digest the absorbed essence and blood. Therefore, they weren't forging ahead at a quick pace. The accusations made on Yi Shiwen's name were also growing. In fact, many people had also begun to blame him for this calamity. However, not many people had the courage to criticize that blood-red-clothed young master. The Yuan school had maintained silence on the criticisms of the outside world. They didn't say anything. On this day, the shadow of a person appeared outside the Great Wu State's Silver Light Mountain village. Bang! A huge explosion occurred. The shadow of that person suddenly stamped his foot and released waves of golden ripples. These ripples then proliferated in the surroundings. He was flying in the air like an ancient god, and his eyes looked ice-cold. The ground collapsed, and the space shattered wherever those golden ripples went. Who has dared to enter our Silver Light Mountain village? A loud shout came from inside the Silver Light Mountain village as many tyrannical semi-sage experts rushed out. Many legendary experts were also present. They too possessed profound cultivation and vigorous auras. Each of them had tyrannical aura which could scare anyone. Yishuan faintly smiled and didn't say anything. Those golden ripples then swept across like waves of the sea and flooded the Silver Light Mountain village. Rumble, the space got shattered, and buildings were destroyed in a split second wherever those golden sea waves went. And those semi-sage experts were sent flying as soon as the waves struck them. Who is this man? He dares to rush inside the Silver Light Mountain village? Someone shouted since they had been stunned by this incredible battle scene. Many of the experts who were in the vicinity of the Silver Light Mountain village rushed over to see. They saw that a golden figure had arrived in the sky above the Silver Light Mountain village. This individual looked like a golden god of war, and these people became extremely surprised when they saw this. Who didn't know that the Silver Light Mountain village had turned arrogant and despotic, having made their surrender to the Chi state. In fact, they were brimming with arrogance. So, who would dare to offend them, let alone arriving at their door to fight in this way? That man, is that Yishuan? I've heard of him, and I have also seen his portrait. It's genuinely him. I'm not mistaken about this. What? He's Yishuan? Isn't he guarding the Yuan school? How he has appeared here? Everyone is saying that he has transformed since we last saw him on that day. He became famous on the Demon Island. Only 10 years have passed, but even the semi-sage experts don't look to be a match for him. Some people became extremely shocked as they recognized Yishuan. More and more people rushed over there to see this astonishing scene. Who the hell are you? A senior semi-sage expert of the Silver Light Mountain village shouted. Those golden waves unleashed by Yishuan's step had nearly blasted him to death. You are Yishuan? An expert of the Silver Light Mountain village recognized Yishuan and became extremely shocked at this realization. Yishuan had become widely popular in the entire southeast region of late. So, they also knew about him. The experts of the Silver Light Mountain village were one of the main forces that had besieged the Yuan school. So, wouldn't they have felt terrified to see him at their doorstep this time? Finally, someone has recognized me. Yishuan faintly laughed and said, Yishuan, what do you want to do? That powerful senior expert of the semi-sage realm tried to act calm and asked, I will do everything which you were trying to do. You have willingly become the pawns of those people of the Chi state. So, you should have been prepared for this day. Yishuan coldly laughed. Today, I will prove that your Silver Light Mountain village's fate has come to an end. Everyone suddenly understood what was going on. The people of the Silver Light Mountain village had besieged the Yuan school, and now they were happily acting as the pawns of the Chi state. So, it was time for them to face the retaliation. Yishuan finished speaking. Then he slowly walked towards those people of the Silver Light Mountain village. And his imposing aura was becoming more and more severe with every step that he was taking. The golden waves under his feet surged up violently, and he appeared like the reincarnation of an ancient god. Rumble! His dreadful, imposing aura swept out. Those legendary experts couldn't resist the terrifying might and fell onto their knees. Their legs had broken on the spot. Yishuan didn't restrain his murderous aura. In fact, he set it free without any hesitation, and it spread everywhere in the sky. Those onlookers also retreated several steps. They didn't dare to come close. They couldn't come close to that killing intention. They were trembling with fear. Yishuan, don't dare to act too insolent. Our Silver Light Mountain village also has a senior sage ancestor. So, you won't be benefited if you killed us. That senior semi-sage realm expert shouted. I see. Then, I'll let him come for me. I wish to ask him what he was up to this entire time. Yishuan laughed disdainfully. Nobody can be compared with you when it comes to talking too much. You were jumping in joy after you became the pawns. Many people have died because of you. So, it's the time to take back the debt of blood from you. These people of the Silver Light Mountain village had been jumping in joy since they had gotten the support of the Chi state, and they had obtained enormous benefits because of that. However, they would also have to be the first ones to face the retaliation since they were on the front line. Yi Shiwen, don't you dare to be hypocritical before me. You should have gone in front of that young master and asked for your death with your hands tied if you genuinely cared about the lives of those ordinary mortals. A person of the Silver Light Mountain village interrupted Yi Shiwen by saying this. Those people? Yi Shiwen coldly laughed. They make too much noise. That blood-red-clothed young master can kill people. But don't forget that I can also do that. Countless experts became numb as they heard this. A chill ran down their spines. It wasn't easy to deal with this man who was present before their eyes. He was no pushover. He had already become widely famous once because of his killing sprees on the Demon Island. So, it was rather funny that many people still thought that it would be easy to bully him. People hadn't dared to provoke that blood-red-clothed young master. Instead, they had blamed Yi Shiwen for this chaos. Many people even had ulterior motives and wanted these words to reach the ears of the Qi Coalition so that they could survive. However, they hadn't thought that Yi Shiwen could also dare to kill people, just like that blood-red-clothed young master. How could a person who had released such a statement be treated with leniency? Perhaps some people were going to have a bad luck. People had previously thought that Yi Shiwen wouldn't say anything because of the criticism. However, it turned out that he simply didn't care about some random person's cry. These disciples of the Silver Light Mountain village reacted in quick succession. They realized that this man before their eyes was also a god-killer. Form a lineup. We must stop this guy. I have already informed the Great Qi Coalition. They are sending sage experts to kill this monster. That senior semi-sage expert shouted. To be continued. Chapter 482. Monster. Yi Shiwen laughed. He didn't even look at that man properly as he shot his fist. Countless spirit energies began to rage up and roar. It seemed as if a universe was revolving on top of his fist. Then, a universe evolved out of his fist intention. His fist then transformed into a huge star and pounded down. Rumble. The matrix formation of the Silver Light Mountain village got broken in an instant, and the entire land got shattered into bits and pieces. Moreover, the microcosm that was there inside also collapsed, and the innumerable disciples that were there inside died in the raging chaos. It wasn't clear how many people had sustained injuries or had died under this one fist attack. The microcosm had collapsed. Those disciples weren't powerful enough and had failed to escape. A strong killing intention appeared in the eyes of that old ancestor of the Silver Light Mountain village as soon as he saw the massive casualties of his disciples. He got so angry that he spouted a mouthful of blood. "You big monster, how can you slaughter us like this without any hesitation? You will face the repercussions sooner or later. Don't you think it's kind of funny? Everything happens because of a reason, and it must have its consequences. Hadn't you thought about retribution when you were slaughtering everyone in the Great Yu State?" Yi Shiwen grinned. A bright smile appeared on his face. However, he looked as frightening as a smiling demon to other people. "Everyone, do you only wish to watch with folded arms? He will die when our sage experts arrive, and everyone will be rewarded for showing their might and glory when the time comes." That old ancestor of the semi-sage realm promptly roared when he saw that he couldn't stop Yi Shiwen on his own. The experts in the surroundings were aroused to move into action when they heard these words of that old ancestor of the semi-sage realm. But then, they hesitated when they saw Yi Shiwen's ice-cold eyes. Was this a joke? They didn't know when those sage experts would arrive. However, this god-killer was present before their eyes. It was like the shame of a mighty dragon. The golden rays of light condensed between Yi Shiwen's palms. His palm then transformed into a huge dragon's claw and fell down from the sky. Bang! The body of that old ancestor of the semi-sage realm got crushed. He only possessed the strength of an ordinary expert of the late stage of the semi-sage realm. He had condensed less than 700 Tao principles. So, he appeared to have been made of clay in front of Yi Shiwen. A semi-sage expert had been grabbed and crushed to death on the spot. This scene had purged the ill intentions of many errant people. Such strength could scare a person to death. A semi-sage expert had been effortlessly crushed to death. Could it be the strength of the sage realm? Buried person's sword, Yishuan shouted. His voice seemed ice-cold and ruthless. Then, a long sword appeared in his hand with a loud, clang sound. The sword energy soared into the sky. The long sword flew into the sky and transformed into countless golden swords. Clang, clang, clang. The golden swords fell down along with the sound of the collision of metals, and they rained upon that entire region. Rumble! The sounds of explosion reverberated unceasingly. The huge area of the encampment of the Silver Light Mountain village had shattered into pieces under the rain of the golden swords. And countless disciples of the Silver Light Mountain village had been impaled to death. A river of blood had started to flow in the village and the surroundings. And the blood fog had begun to diffuse in the air. It was a terrifying spectacle. The warriors who were watching from the surroundings got scared as they saw this scene. In fact, they were so afraid to see this scene that they had been nearly scared to death. Was this formidable fighting strength that of a sage expert? Such dreadful fighting strength was enough to suppress a country. It was the start of transcendence beyond the mortal world and onto the path to become a sage. However, it was also the most frightening transformation. Yishuan used to be a young disciple of the younger generation in the past. However, he had now grown to such an astonishing extent. The news that Yishuan had destroyed the Silver Light Mountain village had spread at a very fast speed throughout the 10 countries of the southeast region. And it had quickly become the most sensational news in the 10 countries of the southeast region after being spread by the people who had seen it on that day. Yishuan hadn't replied to the criticisms of the people of the Great Yu State. In fact, it had seemed as if he hadn't heard them. However, he had now attacked in such a way that it had scared countless people to death. And one statement which Yishuan had spoken had scared them in particular. That blood-red-clothed young master can kill people. But so can I. This statement had scared those errant people who had criticized Yishuan. It wasn't that they had been deceived or that they couldn't differentiate between right and wrong. There was only one reason, and that was that they thought it would be easier to bully Yishuan. After all, Yishuan looked relatively harmless in comparison to that ruthless blood-red-clothed young master who had killed countless people. Therefore, everyone had targeted him instead. However, he had given them a tight slap on their faces with his practical action. In fact, he had made them confused and disoriented. They had been frightened to find that he wasn't a good person either. Those forces of the Great Yu State that had been criticizing Yishuan disappeared almost overnight. And nobody dared to talk things against him again. After all, they might similarly get uprooted if they provoked Yishuan. That blood-red-clothed young master could kill people. But so could he? Yishuan had attacked only once, and all the criticisms had vanished in their entirety. This had made the influence of that blood-red-clothed young master go to waste. Everyone found out that they could no longer direct their hate on Yishuan. So, their hatred was once again turned towards the Qi coalition. However, this wasn't the only shocking thing that had happened. Qi Fifan and the other people had also attacked on the same day and time as Yishuan had. And they too had wiped out the nests of those forces who had been jumping in joy after forging relations with Qi coalition. The 10 most loyal pawns of the Qi coalition had been uprooted within a short time of one day as a result. This development had shaken the entire southeast region, and it had quelled the arrogance and rampancy of the Qi coalition with immediate effect. Yishuan wasn't the kind of person who would scold someone. He would rather eradicate them. The forces that had been jumping in joy had been wiped out. Many people made a scary discovery from these recent movements and realized that many sage experts had appeared in the Yuan school. Therefore, the Qi coalition's superiority would no longer be that obvious if this were to be true. The Qi state's attack didn't have any relation with its national strength. It wasn't like its national strength had witnessed an explosive growth or anything. Their attacking power was purely dependent on their sage experts. However, many sage experts had now arrived in the Yuan school. Therefore, the Qi state hardly had any advantage left. A rather clear situation had begun to become messy as a result. The Qi coalition didn't respond to Yi Shiwen's actions in the beginning. However, they couldn't maintain silence since a few millennium-old inheritances was destroyed the very next day. The Qi coalition hadn't been very united since the beginning, so it was already on the verge of a collapse. Did you hear? Another inheritance has been wiped out. Everyone has been slaughtered, and nobody is left. It's so terrifying. So many inheritances have been wiped out in these 2 days. Yi Shiwen is so vicious and merciless. That blood-red clothed young master had wanted him to come and ask for death in the beginning. However, it suddenly seems like a joke. That young master must be feeling like he has been slapped in the face. He must be seeing stars revolving before his eyes. Some people were continuously spreading these unfavorable comments regarding the Qi coalition. The experts of the Yuan school, and some people obviously hated that blood-red-clothed young master. It wasn't clear how many forces had been wiped out during the glorious expansion of the Qi coalition, and many of these people were the survivors of these forces. So, they obviously possessed deep-rooted hatred towards the Qi coalition. However, these people hadn't dared to show up in public till now because of Qi coalition's tyrannical strength. However, they had also begun to spread such news without any hesitation after they had watched the Yuan school take the lead. Consequently, the Qi coalition's fame sustained a severe blow. Initially, many people had no other choice but to surrender because of Qi coalition's glory and prestige. However, many people had now begun to think that the Qi coalition wouldn't be able to dominate for a long time since more and more inheritance had gotten wiped out. Therefore, nobody was willing to act as their pawns now. Many forces had also begun to sideline themselves from the coalition. The blood-red-clothed young master had been very pleased and satisfied with his scheme at first. However, he almost exploded with rage after he heard about Yi Shiwen's actions. This was the so-called leading someone by the nose. Someone was leading him by the nose for the first time. Moreover, Yi Shiwen hadn't given him any respect. Instead, what he wanted to do to Yi Shiwen was actually being done to him by Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen was like a hedgehog who had made it difficult for him to eat its meat. I want him dead. This bastard will certainly die. The blood-red-clothed young master shouted. His handsome face had begun to turn a bit distorted and sinister. Search everywhere. I want to know his current location, the blood-red-clothed young master said angrily. He had believed that he could use these indiscriminate massacres to force Yi Shiwen to come out. However, Yi Shiwen had turned out to be a very cold-blooded person in his opinion, since he wasn't paying attention to the casualties of these ordinary people. So, this young master had found himself at a loss. Initially, he wanted to kill everyone in Yuan school in order to force Yi Shiwen to come out. However, he had changed his mind now. He couldn't wait for so long. Soon, someone gave him Yi Shiwen's information. Reporting to young master, someone saw Yi Shiwen today. He has already arrived in Qi State. What? He has arrived in Qi State? The black-robed old man was standing beside the young master. He immediately became shocked by this news. He wasn't like that blood-red-clothed young master. He was born and brought up in Qi State. He was a senior expert of the Qi State. So, he couldn't helplessly watch the Qi State sinking into disaster. Let's go. I will kill him today itself. The complexion of the blood-red-clothed young master turned ugly as he said. He felt that he had been provoked. So, he would lose people's faith if he didn't counterattack ferociously. The news that Yi Shiwen had arrived in Qi State and the blood-red-clothed young master was about to leave for the same place had spread out. Many spectators also followed en masse to see this stunning battle. This might be the first time that they would be able to see a battle between the powerhouses who were perhaps even more powerful than sage experts. The blood-red-clothed young master was burning in rage. He led a group to the Qi State, and even the lowest-ranked experts in that group were of semi-sage realm. They rushed back to the Qi State. It took only half a day's time for a person as strong as him to arrive in the Qi State. This region would eventually become a battlefield. I've been waiting for you since a long time," an ice-cold voice sounded from inside the void. A long sword fell down from the void and streaked across the sky. It seemed as if the world would collapse. The sword energy soared into the sky, and it seemed as if it would destroy the heaven and wipe out the earth. To be continued. Chapter 483. A long sword shuttled out of the void and rushed towards that blood-red-clothed young master. The sword soared into the ninth heaven. It seemed as if that iron sword would destroy the entire world. "Idiot, do you think I don't have any defense?" The blood-red-clothed young master grinned fiendishly. He suddenly shot a scarlet lance to welcome the iron sword which was arriving ferociously. Bang! That iron sword and the lance suddenly collided and set off boundless energies everywhere. The rogue energy blotted out the sky and covered the earth as it swept out. In fact, it swept across like great ocean waves. Consequently, turbulence surged up and shattered a big chunk of void. A slim figure appeared in the sky. He was treading on boundless golden ocean waves. It seemed as if he was clad in divine, golden clothes. He was holding the iron sword upside down in his hand. He stood motionless in the void. His golden energy was soaring into the sky. His facial expression looked calm and unaffected. In fact, it seemed as if he hadn't launched that attack a moment ago. The blood-red-clothed young master became extremely angry when he saw Yishuan, and his countenance started to look a bit sinister. He coldly squeezed out these words from between his teeth. "Have you come to die? To die? You think far too highly of yourself." Yishuan replied indifferently. Chief Fifin and the other people had arrived behind him. Several elite experts had also arrived behind the blood-red-clothed young master in quick succession. "Kill them." The blood-red-clothed young master clenched his teeth and ordered, "Don't leave anyone alive. I want them to die an ugly death." He had always given a lot of importance to himself, and this wasn't the first time that he had someone in this way. He had always schemed against other people. Moreover, he hadn't suffered a loss in any of those instances. However, he had tumbled when he came across Yishuan here, and he would suffer a great loss if he couldn't kill Yishuan. "Yes, young master." A black-robed old man came out from the shadow and stood behind that blood-red-clothed young master. He then cupped his hands in obeisance and responded. The imposing aura of that black-robed old man burst out, and the released energy swallowed thousands of miles. It seemed as if it had swept across the entire world. He was a dreadful expert of the perfection level of the sage realm. Many onlookers became scared as they saw this scene. Their complexions paled. They hadn't reached the sage realm, so they didn't know about different power levels of the sage realm. However, they could feel this black-robed old man's incredible power. It had far surpassed their imaginations. In fact, they felt as if he could destroy the world with a mere flick of his hand. It wasn't surprising that the blood-red-clothed young master had been so confident this entire time. After all, such an expert had remained hidden behind him. Anyone in his place would have been so confident. Yishuan's complexion had turned solemn, so he actually has such a protector. It's not surprising that he's so insolent. One must know that the southeast region was located in a desolate area. However, it still fell under the true Martial University's territory. This young master may be at the initial stage of the Sage Realm. However, he wouldn't be able to save himself if some experts of the true Martial University were to be mobilized to get rid of this guy for his atrocious acts. He has the support of such an expert. Is it possible that he also has the support of some big force? Nobody among you will be able to go back today. The blood-red-clothed young master let out a demonic laughter as he spoke up. The essence and blood of a sage expert is equal to that of millions of these ordinary people. However, the entire world had suddenly begun to tremble before he could think more on this. Bang! The weather changed its color for a moment. In fact, it seemed like the scene before calamity, as if the world was about to disintegrate. A blade appeared, and it seemed as if it had managed to cut through perpetual flow of time itself. It pressed down from above and its target turned out to be that black-robed old man who had revealed his dreadful strength a while ago. A skinny figure suddenly arrived in front of that black-robed old man. The blade energy split the vast sky and streaked across the void, and it seemed as if it would chop the whole world. That black-robed old man used his incredible strength and avoided this blade in the nick of time. However, his complexion turned solemn since he was shocked to see the figure of an old man emerge before his eyes. He looked like an average old man in ordinary servant-like clothing. However, he had seen the terrifying might of this skinny old man a moment ago. So, he had obviously become vigilant. In fact, the black-robed old man couldn't conceal the shocked expression in his eyes. That tyrannical blade energy had shaken the world a moment ago. It was deafening, and it would have cut him into two halves if it had struck him. His martial power is incredible and frightening. Who is this man? His eyes were filled with look of dread. Everyone had witnessed this old man's martial expertise a moment, and everyone had been shocked by it. His one sword had forced that black-robed old man to retreat in frenzy. One must know that that black-robed old man was a senior expert of the perfection level of the sage realm. However, he had been forced to retreat in frenzy. Could this skinny old man be a senior expert of the great sage realm? That old man in a servant-like attire was standing in the void. His clothes were fluttering in the wind. His spiritual pressure had suppressed all directions. He was carrying a long sword which could tyrannize the world. Who are you? The black-robed old man seemed extremely scared as he asked, "Are you an expert of the True Martial University? This is True Martial University's territory. You have caused a huge disturbance here. Moreover, you have also looked down upon our True Martial University." The skinny old man dressed in a servant's attire solemnly replied, "Isn't that right? My friend from the Meteor Sect?" Meteor Sect? Everyone went in uproar as soon as this name came out. They hadn't expected that the blood-red-clothed young master would have such origin. Several people had been guessing about his background since nobody had been convinced that he was a random cultivator with no background. One could even say that other people must commit suicide if a random cultivator with no background could cultivate to such an extent. They had tried possible speculations and angles. They had even listed the big forces of the entire true martial world. However, they hadn't thought that blood-red-clothed young master would turn out to be from the foreign territory. In fact, only a few old experts among the residents of the 10 countries of the southeast region had heard the name of the Meteor Sect. However, those people were the old monsters who had been cultivating for hundreds of years. They weren't young and inexperienced who had recently made a debut like Yishuan. The so-called background of these old experts wasn't visible from their strength alone. In fact, the mere vast pool of experience which they possessed had created an enormous disparity between them and the young experts like Yi Shiwen. They were inferior to Yi Shiwen, but their experience had thrown him many streets. And one needed time to accumulate knowledge and experiences. That's not a legend. Isn't the Meteor Sect an extremely tyrannical martial arts school of the chaotic heavenly territory? It has been said that it rules over the entire southern region of the chaotic heavenly territory. Their word is the law over there. It's a very powerful school. Yeah, it has been said that they rule a world which is called the Meteor World. The entire Meteor World is their territory, and it is as powerful as the True Martial University once used to be. Anyone would have been extremely terrified by their power, even if the said individual had only heard a few words about them. A school had control over an entire world. It was an absolute colossus. It was same as the True Martial University used to be in the past. Anyone could estimate how dreadful the Meteor Sect was by looking at the True Martial University's past glory. However, the Meteor Sect was very far from the true martial world. Factually speaking, it was highly unlikely for people to travel from this world to that one, and vice versa. However, this could still be considered as provocation. The entire void had broken into small pieces. There was a pin-drop silence. That old man in a servant's attire was still standing in the void. He looked very skinny. However, he possessed astonishing strength. You have broken the rule and jumped across the worlds. So, don't blame me for being impolite. The skinny old man casually spoke up. However, his words had a strange and persuasive strength about their tone. You are daring to stop us even when you know that we belong to the meteor sect? You are extremely reckless. The black-robed old man attacked the undeterred skinny old man. A big hand swept out, and it seemed as if a star had fallen down from the space as it charged towards that skinny old man to crush him. Everyone gasped. It was an extremely frightening attack. Its might was merely one step away from reaching the threshold of the great sage realm. It had carried endless might. The skinny old man in a servant's attire was calm and composed. He raised his blade and slashed it downwards. Thousands of creative concepts evolved and stretched out in the sky like a magnificent picture scroll. This blade attack carried huge power as it smashed down. Both of them had already reached the peak of the sage realm, and their extremely terrifying battle had also reached the peak very quickly. Rumble! The dreadful attacks collided into each other. It opened endless cracks in the space. In fact, it wasn't clear how many cracks had been opened in a vast radius. It seemed as if the world had lost its color. The sun and moon had lost their radiance. It seemed like a scene on Doomsday. Neither of them stopped at this, and went even higher in the sky as they continued to fight. The dreadful aftermath of their clashes set off shock waves. Most of the spectators here were high-level experts. In fact, the weakest among them were at the semi-sage realm. Otherwise, these shock waves would have killed countless experts by now. Is this a fight between two sage experts? Then, how formidable would those great sage experts be? Everyone was left dumbstruck, but someone still managed to mutter these words out. Sage-level experts were like gods to them. In fact, this was true when one considers that a sage expert could destroy the world like a god could. Not to mention that these two old men were at the peak of the sage realm. Hence, their battle had shaken the entire world. The spectacle of a fight between great sage experts would be beyond everyone's imagination. Yishuin slowly walked towards that blood-red-clothed young master. He still held the iron sword upside down, and he coldly said, "I will teach you a lesson today. I will send you on your way to hell." The eyes of the blood-red-clothed young master flickered as he looked at Yishuin. It wasn't clear what he was thinking. Perhaps he hadn't thought that the situation turned out like this. He had arrived here in haste. He seemed like a bold guy. However, he had planned everything in advance, and he had measured all the aspects. However, the only thing he hadn't anticipated was that the opposite party would also have concealed a protector of the perfection level of the sage realm. Moreover, that skinny old man seemed like an extraordinary expert whose identity was unknown. The original plan has changed now. However, you will still die, without a doubt. The blood-red-clothed young master burst into laughter as he said. His murderous aura surged up and began to boil, and the surrounding space distorted because of his murderous aura. The complexions of several spectators had turned pale when they saw this scene from afar. They could feel the killing intent of the blood-red-clothed young master. It was such a grandiose, killing intention that it wasn't clear how many people had been slaughtered in order to accumulate it. And the entire of it had been set free by him at this time. Yishuin also looked serious. His aura seemed to have a lot of rage and killing intent as well. In fact, he had also killed many people. However, it wasn't clear how much his murderous aura differed from that of the blood-red-clothed young master. Yishuin had certainly killed a lot of people. However, he couldn't be compared with that blood-red-clothed young master, since that man would slaughter everyone in a city whenever and wherever he appeared. I will kill you and suck your essence and blood. Then, my cultivation will advance a step further. The blood-red-clothed young master let out an evil laughter as he said. He could feel that Yishuin possessed plentiful quantities of blood and energy, so much so that they could be condensed into an energy pillar that could shoot up into the sky. He didn't know that Yishuin's foundation had become incredibly profound. So, his martial power would advance far more than a mere step if he could obtain Yi Shiwen's essence and blood. Yi Shiwen's essence was certainly much more powerful than those 10 millions ordinary people. You are too arrogant. To be continued. Chapter 484. Chief Fifan and other people also decided their sage-level opponents in quick succession and began to fight. Too arrogant, Yi Shiwen coldly shouted. He didn't say anything further. The iron sword in his hand slashed down along with the sound of collision of metals. It was merely an ordinary iron sword. It wasn't clear from where he had obtained it. However, it displayed the greatest of might in his hand. The sword energy soared into the sky. It swept across violently and minced the clouds in the sky. The sword streaked across and tore the vast sky. The metal clanging sound sounded unceasingly. This ordinary iron sword carried endless power. In fact, it seemed like some immortal sword. Its power was so destructive that it annihilated everything that came in its path. It seemed as if Yi Shiwen had finally reached the doorway of the Devil Realm. Bang! The blood-red-clothed young master sneered. The tip of his lance rose up in the air and broke open a large hole in the void. It looked exceptionally terrifying. Scarlet rays of light covered his entire body. In fact, they started to seem like a blood-red cloak. Rumble! Yi Shiwen's sword and the blood-red-clothed young master's lance collided. The vast sky had been disintegrated. It seemed as if the world had turned upside down, and the chaos leaked out from the cracks in the space. Both individuals possessed incredible fighting strength. It was a bitter clash, and it seemed as if two massive stars had collided. Their collision was truly earth-shattering. The blood-red-clothed young master became terrified since he realized that his arms had turned a bit numb. He had been suppressed by Yi Shiwen. He had never experienced this before. It wasn't clear how long he had been practicing the cultivation method of the meteor sect. He had been absorbing the power of the stars to temper his body for a very long period of time. He also had the assistance of several other supreme power techniques, but he rarely revealed them. Therefore, he possessed a genuinely strong body, and his body had become even stronger after he had begun to practice the Dark Spirit Blood Emperor power technique. So, there were very few people who could rival him when it to physique, let alone suppress him. Both of them are fighting neck to neck. It's an evenly matched battle. They have met a good opponent. Someone among the spectators who were standing afar spoke up. They still had more confidence on the blood-red-clothed young master in comparison to Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen was certainly very powerful. However, the experts whom he had killed were at the semi-sage realm. None of them were as powerful as a sage expert. However, the blood-red-clothed young master had ripped apart a senior sage-level ancestor of the Great Yu State before their eyes. However, they didn't expect that it would be an evenly matched fight in reality. Whoosh! The two figures broke away from each other, and each landed on top of a mountain peak. They were standing opposite to each other and were separated by a long distance. Incredible energies were fluctuating on their bodies. Very good, very good. You're quite strong. However, it's also a good thing. I would advance a step further and proclaim myself as hegemon after I've absorbed your essence and blood. The blood-red-clothed young master didn't get scared after being amazed at first. On the contrary, he became more insolent. Yi Shiwen's eyes had turned ice-cold. An incredible chill was surging in his eyes. The blood-red-clothed young master had annoyed him. You're dishonest, and your ways are truly despicable. Humph! Dishonest? What do you know? I'm the most powerful and talented person. I'm the most eligible person to inherit the throne. I don't care about the methods as long as I can achieve my goal. I don't care if I have to slaughter people, as long as I can practice the Dark Spirit Blood Emperor power technique. A cruel smile appeared on the face of the blood-red-clothed young master. This bloodbath was no different than walking on a pile of ants for him. You're talking nonsense. You are just a coward and nothing more. You have already lost the self-confidence in your own strength and discipline. Yi Shiwen shook his head and replied in a pitiful manner, "You're courting death." It seemed as if Yi Shiwen's words had touched a sore spot of the blood-red-clothed young master's heart. Consequently, a ruthless, killing intention began to boil in his eyes. Bang! The lance point dropped on top of the mountain peak, and it got disintegrated. The surrounding atmosphere began to boil vigorously, and gradually began to transform into a red color. Then, the strands of these red-colored energies swept across, and the space was crushed into fragments wherever they went. Yi Shiwen's long sword streaked across the sky. He and his sword looked very ordinary in comparison to the dreadful might of the blood-red-clothed young master. However, it seemed as if his one sword would break 10,000 principles as it swept out, and it appeared as if any terrifying attack would get defeated by his ordinary iron sword. Clang! A loud metal clanging sound reverberated. The tip of the sword and the point of the lance collided. Both individuals looked like two formidable gods who had decided to fight on the earth. Both of them retreated several steps by the terrifying force of their collision. The space had been crushed as they trod several steps onto it, and the rumbling sound echoed in the surroundings. Their murderous auras overflowed the sky. The power in their attacks had decreased a bit. However, their movements were still incredibly quick, and they had already exchanged hundreds of moves within a short time. In fact, their movements were as quick as the lightning that pierces the atmosphere. The complementary shock waves produced by their clashes bulldozed countless mountains down. The fight between these two individuals had been tantamount to an enormous disaster for the surrounding space. In fact, the entire space in this region might collapse if any one of them wasn't careful. Everyone became scared. The experts of the younger generation especially found themselves too ordinary as they witnessed this level of fight and tried to compare themselves to these two individuals. Such fighting strength was enough to be named as the peak expert of the initial stage of the Sage realm. So, they looked too ordinary in front of these two individuals. Clang! Both sides had exchanged more than 100 moves within a short time period. Yi Shiwen's moves weren't too splendid. He would only hack and slash his sword in a casual manner. However, the blood-red-clothed young master would have to defend himself from these sword attacks every single time. In fact, the blood-red-clothed young master couldn't launch any large-scale attack on him because of this. The blood-red-clothed young master became terrified as he realized that he had been suppressed by Yi Shiwen. His arms had turned numb. Moreover, he wasn't in the kind of situation where he could use his real elemental energy to overcome this numbness either. Clang! The loud sound of metallic vibrations came from the sky, and the energy rushed upwards into the clouds. Yi Shiwen didn't give the blood-red-clothed young master a chance to respite, and the fierce sword once again swept down towards him. Yi Shiwen had taken the path of full-on large-scale attacks. In layman's language, he had gone all out to kill his target by using brute force. In fact, he hadn't even used any fancy moves in the process. The long sword in Yi Shiwen's hand didn't seem to issue any complicated sword moves. It only displayed basic sword moves. However, Yi Shiwen possessed the greatest might in his hand, and it seemed as if it would bring about Armageddon as it slashed down towards the blood-red-clothed young master. Whoosh! The blood-red-clothed young master had no choice but to move forward to face the attack. He mustn't show any weakness this time. Bang! 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 Both sides went all out. They didn't use any gaudy and gorgeous moves. It was a blatant collision of brute force. Anyway, no fancy styles would have worked in the face of such raw power. The blood-red-clothed young master spared no effort while he confronted Yi Shiwen. However, he had still been suppressed by Yi Shiwen. Moreover, he didn't get any time to breathe while facing Yi Shiwen's quick and fierce sword attacks. Each of these moves was very simple and basic. However, he had to face them nonetheless. Yi Shiwen wouldn't die if he were to receive one of his blows. However, he would certainly be hacked if he were to receive even a single blow of Yi Shiwen's. He had also figured out that Yi Shiwen possessed a formidable physique since they had exchanged so many moves. He didn't know what kind of special physique Yi Shiwen possessed. However, he couldn't dare to face Yi Shiwen's iron sword head-on. Many spectators were left dumbstruck as they watched this from afar. This fight had started only moments ago, but the fight had diverted from their imaginations since the blood-red-clothed young master hadn't gained the upper hand even once. Rather, Yi Shiwen had. Moreover, Yi Shiwen was still gradually suppressing him into a worse situation. What kind of physique does Yi Shiwen possess? How he can be so ferocious? I can tell that blood-red-clothed young master isn't daring to receive even one attack from him. Yi Shiwen's iron sword had merely touched his lance, and then I saw that his hands were left to tremble. That is known as tyrant body. It is said to be an extremely ferocious physique. Even the Titan body isn't its match. Someone explained it. That fight which had taken place in the true martial university had gradually become publicly known. So, Yi Shiwen had gradually become famous in the world. Yi Shiwen's complexion didn't change. However, he had become a bit anxious inside. And that was because this blood-red-clothed young master was very cunning. In fact, he wasn't as wild and tyrannical as he would pretend to be. He had switched to guerrilla tactics after he had realized that he would lose if he were to recklessly charge head-on. Consequently, he would attack and then promptly pull back. He didn't prolong the time frame of the contact. His movements were also extremely quick. Yi Shiwen hadn't opened his demon wings yet. Therefore, he wasn't at his top speed at this time. So, he couldn't overtake the opponent. Otherwise, a single sword strike would have chopped his opponent into two halves. Ha! Yi Shiwen shouted loudly. He then suddenly attacked, and the iron sword transformed into a dragon. It crushed the void, and the entire world trembled under its might. The tyrannical sword energy broke down everything in the surroundings. This was the so-called, I have the entire world in my hand if I have a long sword in my hand. Yi Shiwen wasn't a sword cultivator. However, there wasn't any difference between him and a sword cultivator when the long sword was in his hand. Rumble! The long sword pressed down and crushed everything. It seemed as if the world had collapsed. The might of this sword was enormous. However, its speed was also extremely quick. Yi Shiwen had slashed down this long sword with all his strength. The essence of the buried heaven sword had been revealed to its peak. It was only an ordinary iron sword which had been slashed down in a casual manner. However, he had already mastered the sword intention. So, it seemed as if it would destroy the world once it was brandished. Poochie! The speed of this sword was so fast that the blood-red-clothed young master didn't get any time to react. And it cut open a terrible wound in his body. Blood splashed out and sprayed in the air. Yi Shiwen's movement was extremely quick. In fact, it was almost like the lightning. The majority of people couldn't see the movements of these two individuals very clearly, and they only saw the blood as it splashed out. Consequently, they didn't know who had sustained the injuries. The eyes of many people remained wide open as they saw this scene. They had almost been scared to death. Almost everyone had been more optimistic about the blood-red-clothed young master before the fight had begun. However, Yi Shiwen had gained the upper hand here. Therefore, he had established himself as more formidable and savage than the blood-red-clothed young master in such a short time. Many people had blind trust on the blood-red-clothed young master. So, they were still thinking that he would win until a moment ago. However, they became extremely amazed when they found out that Yi Shiwen wasn't the first one to sustain injuries in the battle. Rather, the blood-red-clothed young master was, the blood-red-clothed young master has been injured. How's this possible? Many people had become shocked as they saw this scene. A chill ran down their spines, and a feeling of reverence and awe aroused inside them as they saw Yi Shiwen's slim figure. You have completely infuriated me. The blood-red-clothed young master couldn't believe his eyes as he saw the wounds on his own body, and he shouted in a ferocious manner. To be continued. Chapter 485. Scarlet flames were frantically burning on the body of the blood-red-clothed young master, and spooky screams could be heard from the flames. "You talk nonsense." An astonishing sword beam emerged along with Yi Shiwen's shout. Yi Shiwen's movement was extremely quick, and he forged ahead to kill without any hesitation. He didn't even think about whether the blood-red-clothed young master had finished speaking or not. The blood-red-clothed young master roared. His lance went into the sky and produced an inexhaustible lance shadow. It punctured the sky and pressed down the horizon. It blotted out the sky and covered the earth as it swept down. Rumble! The lance's shadow and the sword's beam collided in the void. Consequently, a dreadful force began to boil and then swept all across. The blood-red-clothed young master retreated several steps in order to escape Yi Shiwen's terrifying power. He had put his own body at stake and had gone all out. However, he wasn't Yi Shiwen's opponent. He couldn't suppress Yi Shiwen even after he had used his power or his secret techniques. On the contrary, he had been forced to retreat by Yi Shiwen's incessant attacks. Yi Shiwen collected his iron sword and assumed a stance. A boundless and grand aura spread out and submerged the surroundings. It seemed as if the surroundings had transformed into a universe within a split second. He and the blood-red-clothed young master were in the center of this universe at this time. It seemed as if he had broken this world and had established another one in its place. He had mastered the elements earth, fire, water, and wind. A huge formation of stars had appeared behind him. It gradually began to rotate and started to emit a domineering aura. Both of them had landed into a sea of stars. It should be mentioned that the blood-red-clothed young master had fallen into the ideal condition of Yi Shiwen's fist technique. "What kind of martial arts technique is this? It looks incredible," someone spoke up while trembling with fear. The ideal condition of a martial arts technique and its level were usually related to each other. The higher the level of a martial arts technique, more dreadful its ideal condition would be. Moreover, that entire universe had been integrated into this fist technique in this case. So, one could well imagine the level of this martial arts technique. The complexion of the blood-red-clothed young master had also turned exceptionally ugly. He had been dragged inside the secret world of Yi Shiwen's martial arts technique. So, the consequences would certainly be very serious. Rumble! Yi Shiwen shot his fist, and that huge formation of stars began to move behind him. It swept forth and issued terrifying rumbling sound. It rushed in from all directions and swept over towards the blood-red-clothed young master to crush him. Whoosh! The blood-red-clothed young master displayed the mystical world of his own martial arts technique in order to counter Yi Shiwen's secret world. A scarlet world suddenly appeared, and bloody waves started to surge everywhere. Then, a blood emperor took his place above those bloody waves. He shot his scarlet lance upward to welcome the incoming attack. It suddenly thrust out. The scarlet lance produced scarlet ripples as it swept out, and everything turned red wherever the ripples went. The blood-red-clothed young master was cruel and extremely arrogant. However, he genuinely did possess extremely powerful strength. His magical power overflowed the sky, and it was truly dreadful. In fact, it was more than sufficient to meet the standard of a top heaven's pride level expert. A breaking sound was suddenly heard since the sea of stars was ripped apart. After that, mighty and boundless sonic booms dissipated in all directions. And the Blood Emperor rode upon the scarlet waves and arrived in front of Yi Shiwen's big star formation. Rumble! The Blood Emperor and the stars collided. This was a contest between two individuals who possessed terrifying willpowers. Bang! The Blood Emperor was crushed into fragments by that huge star formation. He managed to recondense some distance away, but he had seemingly dimmed by a significant margin. The complexion of the blood-red-clothed young master turned as gloomy and cold as dusk when he looked at Yi Shiwen. He then brandished his lance along with a long and loud roar. It emitted scarlet rays of light and suppressed the surroundings as it pressed down like a giant dragon. The iron sword appeared in Yi Shiwen's hand once again. After that, his right hand unleashed the buried sword secret, while his left showcased the Big Bang Stardust Fist. He was doing two tasks at one time. His hands were unleashing the two different fighting techniques at the same time. Only he could do such a thing. He had become habitual of doing two tasks at a time ever since he had obtained the mysterious space. Even his mind had become used to multitasking. Two stunning secret techniques pressed down at the same time, and the blood-red-clothed young master retreated in the face of such attacks. The huge star formation swept down to crush, and the iron sword went forth to slash. Yishuin had gone all out. He wasn't holding back one bit. The fight between these two individuals had become incomparably dreadful. It wasn't clear how many times that Scarlet World and Yishuin Starfield had clashed in one moment. The Scarlet Ocean had reversed its direction due to the clashes, while the stars had started to chip off. Both the individuals had resorted to extreme methods. The blood-red-clothed young master firmly clenched his teeth and made his best effort to attack again. And the scarlet lance swept out like a dragon. Bang! Yishuin's sword slashed down. It appeared as heavy as a star. The blood-red-clothed young master raised his lance to resist the attack. However, his palm was split open in a split second. It had been ruptured by the vigorous power that had been instilled into Yishuin's sword move. The blood-red-clothed young master had survived till now, and this feat was already beyond Yishuin's imagination. One must know that an average person couldn't resist a single sword move of Yishuin's. However, this man had managed to survive till now, and this feat was enough to prove that he also possessed an extraordinary physique. Moreover, each of the Heaven's Pride level experts was good in some aspects, and also had some weaknesses. However, he didn't have any clear weak points. His physique was beyond an ordinary person's imagination, even if it wasn't as incredible as that of Emperor Chen's. However, Yishuin had displayed the superiority of his physique when they had clashed. Pucci, the blood-red-clothed young master, spouted a mouthful of blood. He vomited blood from his mouth. His body looked very insignificant in front of the stars. It was impossible for him to face the continued barrage of Yishuin stars and the buried sword secret attack at the same time. His eyes had finally started to reveal a look of panic at this time, since he hadn't thought that things would turn out like this. His ego and arrogance had originated from his strength. He could be considered at the peak in the younger generation. Therefore, he hadn't expected that he would suffer loss in such a rural region of the true martial world. Moreover, this situation could be considered as a big loss for him. However, he still hadn't lost the confidence. Everything would reverse once that black-robed old man would defeat that skinny and old man in servant attire. And then, this guy before his eyes would die. He had confidence on that black-robed old man's abilities. After all, he was his protector. He was considered as an extremely powerful expert. Moreover, he was at the peak of the Sage realm. A stunning battle had broken out in the sky, and all kinds of creative concepts were being displayed there. The fight had reached to an intense degree. In fact, it was much fiercer than the fight between Yishuin and the blood-red-clothed young master. Pucci, the complexion of the old man in servant's attire had turned ice cold. His blade had swept down, and an arm of that black-robed old man had been chopped down as a result. In fact, his arm had been cut down by the blade intention of that skinny old man. It was a stunning attack, and it seemed to be a very ancient move. Ah! The black-robed old man screamed endlessly. His entire left arm had been severed. Consequently, blood splashed out and formed a scarlet pool on the ground. His eyes were filled with a look of horror. He couldn't believe that his arm had been severed by a blade move. However, the skinny old man didn't wish to give him any chance to breathe. And another blade attack was hacked down immediately after. Bang! The blade intention congealed together and came slashing down, as if on its own will. It seemed unstoppable. Pucci, the blade energy swept down and issued incredible rays of light. The black-robed old man didn't get any time to respond, and his entire body got cut into two halves. Blood splashed out as his body got hacked into two halves. Everyone was left dumbstruck by this development. They hadn't anticipated that they would see such a scene. The real fight hadn't even started long ago, and the fight didn't continue for several days and nights as they had thought. In fact, the winner and the loser had been decided in such a short time on the contrary. A peak expert of the Sage realm had fallen before their eyes. How is this possible? The blood-red clothed young master couldn't believe his eyes. A part of his concentration had remained fixed on the body of the black-robed old man from the beginning. After all, he knew that the final result was dependent on the outcome of the fight between these two senior peak-level Sage experts. However, he hadn't anticipated that the outcome would be decided so soon, and he had obviously never imagined that the person on his own side would lose. The situation had changed very dramatically all of a sudden. Yi Shiwen raised his iron sword. He pointed towards the blue dome of the heaven and said, "Now, I will send you on your way to hell." The complexion of the blood-red clothed young master had turned ugly. He had fallen into the disadvantageous position in this battle with Yi Shiwen, and that black-robed old man had been his only hope. However, he had been killed as well. Consequently, he had lost all hope. Bang! His energy soared into the sky. His aura had promptly moved to the peak since he knew that he didn't have any time to think. "I will kill you in one move." There was no expression on Yi Shiwen's face. His opponent's fate had been sealed. However, the fight between him and the blood-red clothed young master hadn't ended yet. But he didn't wish to delay any further. Qi Fifan, Yang Wenjun, and other people had also obtained overwhelming advantages in their respective battles. Their opponents had previously held the positions of the senior experts of various forces of the Southeast region's 10 countries. However, they had surrendered because of the tyranny of that black-robed old man whom the blood-red clothed young master had brought here. However, that black-robed old man had been killed. So, why would these people willingly stake their lives and press forward for no reason? However, they couldn't escape because of the interceptions that were made by Qi Fifan and the others. It had taken some time, but the disparity between the fairly matured sage experts like Qi Fifan and his teammates and those old ancestors had eventually been revealed. These ancestors had already become old. Why would they have willingly laid down their ambitions and stayed here in Southeast region if they hadn't become very old? They had nearly no hopes for breakthroughs. However, Qi Fifan and his teammates were different. They would fight with honesty and vigor, and they would display explosive strength while fighting. Consequently, they had suppressed those old fogies with the passage of time. Yi Shiwen didn't wish to delay any further, and the blood-red clothed young master also knew that he might get a chance to escape, but only if he could kill Yi Shiwen right now. Otherwise, he might get killed on the spot. Clang! Yi Shiwen brandished his long sword. It transformed into a huge star, and it fell down from the sky like a bolt of lightning. It looked grand and dreadful. The entire void had been cut into two halves by the descending sword energy. The blood-red clothed young master also used his entire strength. His lance shot out and punctured the sky. He clearly knew what this one attack could mean for him. Bang! The dreadful sound of the collision of the weapons swept out, and it set off waves of storms. Pucci! The hands of the blood-red clothed young master had been fractured by this collision. He spouted blood from his mouth. In fact, the bones in his entire body had been smashed by this attack. Pucci! The blood-red clothed young master's defense was shattered by Yi Shiwen. Then his entire body got cut into two halves and transformed into a mass of blood fog. To be continued. Chapter 486. Yi Shiwen had just relaxed a moment ago. However, he suddenly saw that the blood-red clothed young master had slowly begun to condense in the air again, and he slowly regained his shape soon after. Yi Shiwen, you can't kill me. I'm immortal. The Blood Emperor is immortal. Ha 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 ha. The blood-red clothed young master burst into laughter as he spoke this. His countenance had turned a bit sinister. Yi Shiwen's complexion had turned solemn. He knew that the blood-red clothed young master might have practiced some dishonest method of the demon gods, and so he may have become an existence that was neither a ghost nor a demon. What? He had been cut into two halves a moment ago, but he still hasn't died? The blood-red-clothed young master isn't a human. The experts gasped from afar. It seemed as if they couldn't believe the scene which had played before their eyes. He didn't die. Can someone really kill him? This is unnatural. Yi Shiwen, this fight has just begun, the blood-red-clothed young master shouted. The lance in his hand was pointing towards Yi Shiwen from afar. The point of the lance issued astonishing scarlet lights. After that, a scarlet battle armor crawled over his entire body. His body had been cut into two halves a moment ago. However, it had restored at an astonishing speed. Moreover, intermittent screams had sounded as this scene had unfolded. These were the screams of the resentful ghosts of the people he had killed. Countless people got terrified as they saw this strange scene. It seemed as if his body was undergoing some unfathomable transformation. His present aura had suddenly made a qualitative leap in comparison to his previous one. His aura had only made everyone feel gloomy and cold in the past. However, his present negative demonic energy had left them terrified. In fact, they had been scared to death even if they were watching him from afar. Yi Shiwen coldly looked at his transformation. He could feel that something had burst open in his opponent's body. Consequently, his body had gone in an unknown direction because of this astonishing speed of its transformation. However, Yi Shiwen knew that he mustn't allow him to proceed with the transformation. Rumble! Yi Shiwen didn't delay, and he launched the Big Bang Stardust Fist attack. The surroundings transformed into the void of universe, and countless stars began to revolve inside it in a crazed manner. Nobody dared to come close this time. They knew that these stars weren't real and were merely an illusion. However, they were more terrifying than the real stars because these ones had been formed by Yi Shiwen's fist intention. So, they would die if they came in contact with them. Yi Shiwen's fist had transformed into a huge star. It wasn't clear how big it was in reality. It suddenly swept down towards the blood-red-clothed young master to crush him. The blood-red-clothed young master also roared like a madman. His figure had gradually begun to fuse into the Blood Emperor who stood behind him. The Blood Emperor had begun to transform as a result. In fact, it had soon come to possess a presence of its own. His eyes looked like a pair of huge lanterns, and they were brimming with killing intention for Yi Shiwen. I wasn't ready to use this card, since I wanted to use it against that bastard. So, congratulations, Yi Shiwen. You're the first one who has seen this secret power of mine. And I grant you death now. The blood-red-clothed young master spoke up coldly in an anger-filled voice. The blood-red-clothed young master looked a bit relieved inside that Blood Emperor. He had finally transformed into a monster which was neither a human nor a demon. So, Yi Shiwen was already a dead man in his opinion. Consequently, he gradually sank into his own thoughts. This thought had remained buried deep inside his memories for a long time. He used to be an individual of the Meteor sect who wanted to obtain his father's recognition for becoming the young lord. He was a young genius. So, he had inevitably enjoyed all the praises until that year when his elder brother had appeared. His figure was like a giant mountain, and it had become a nightmare that had destroyed his life. Everyone was surprised by his elder brother. Consequently, those praises and approvals were taken away. Even his fame as a genius had also been snatched away by his elder brother. Moreover, he cared about his father's recognition the most, but that was also snatched away. He had been waiting for an opportunity since the day he had obtained the Dark Spirit Blood Emperor Power technique. He didn't even know how many people he had killed in order to practice the Dark Spirit Blood Emperor Power technique. He had invested everything, and all he wanted in return was to kill those people who had despised him once. He wanted to break the neck of that bastard with his own hands, since his old man's facial expression would become quite splendid when that would happen. The movements of the blood-red-clothed young master's hand didn't slow down. In fact, his movements had become even quicker after he had fused with that Blood Emperor. Then, the scarlet lance thrust out as endless scarlet energies wrapped around it. Both individuals had resorted to extreme methods, and this was enough to crush the entire world. Rumble! The battle wreaked havoc in the surroundings. and the cracks became visible in the sky. In fact, the cracks proliferated across the sky like massive spiderwebs. They could be considered as formidable opponents for each other. However, Yi Shiwen was clearly a bit steadier, while the blood-red-clothed young master was more of the impatient type. In fact, he had become even more anxious after the death of that black-robed old man. He was born to sail with the wind as the young lord of the meteor sect. When had he ever been forced into such a disadvantageous situation in a battle? However, his opponent was an evil genius like Yi Shiwen. He had met the strongest opponent in the form of Yi Shiwen. But he wasn't the strongest opponent for Yi Shiwen. However, this was the first time that Yi Shiwen had met an evenly matched opponent after his fighting strength had reached the Sage Realm. The blood-red-clothed young master's strength had increased by leaps and bounds after he had fused with that great Blood Emperor. He had been nothing for Yi Shiwen in the beginning. In fact, he would have already been killed by Yi Shiwen if he hadn't used his schemes and the guerrilla tactics. After all, the Gilded Tyrant form was extremely powerful. Nobody had met a good end while facing Yi Shiwen's Tyrant form. The same thing had happened with the one with the Titan body. One could say that Yi Shiwen had never encountered physiques that were more powerful than the Titan's body, the barbarian god's real body, and so on. And perhaps those physiques could have been able to contend against the Tyrant body. Yi Shiwen had also thought that whether he would be able to sweep away a truly powerful person if ever faced one. After all, the one with Titan body only possessed the bloodline of Titans, and nothing more. So, it would be an entirely different scenario if he were to come across a real Titan. In that case, Yi Shiwen would probably have to fight a bloody battle instead of a bitter struggle. This Blood Emperor was enough to make him pay attention towards himself. Rumble! It took long to describe, but everything had happened in a split second. Both sides had once again begun to attack each other without any hesitation. Both of them had resorted to extreme methods and had refused to give up. It was a dreadful fight. Everyone's hearts had begun to bounce ferociously. These two individuals were extremely ferocious. Almost everyone's gaze was fixed on these two individuals after the fight between that black-robed man and the skinny old man had ended. The fights between other sage experts like Qi Fifan and those old experts had already come to an end. Those old experts had been utterly defeated and killed. After all, these sage experts had become very old. Therefore, there was a big disparity between them and the likes of Qi Fifan, who had become mature and possessed plenty of vitality. However, the blood-red-clothed young master had soon become terrified since he had realized that he still couldn't overpower Yi Shiwen. He saw Yi Shiwen standing firmly in midair. He didn't know when those golden divinities had crawled over that slim body of Yi Shiwen's. Yi Shiwen looked like an ancient golden god of war who was clad in a divine cloak and was looking disdainfully at the mortals from the void. He had become even stronger. He had also unleashed his Gilded Tyrant form to the peak. Therefore, he had become far stronger than before. Rumble! The scarlet and golden figures looked like two clouds in the sky. They blotted out the sky and covered the earth as they swept out towards each other. Bang! Everyone heard a loud and dull scream. It had originated from that terrifying energy storm. After that, a figure dashed out of it. Everyone was startled. They stretched their necks to see who had won. They knew that both individuals had disclosed their hidden cards. Thus, the person who would sustain injuries first would lose for certain. Everyone looked closely. That person turned out to be the blood-red-clothed young master. They were surprised to see that his chest had nearly been punctured. He was drenched with blood, and the blood was still gushing out unceasingly. The scarlet face of that blood-red-clothed young master had suddenly turned pale. That blow had left him seriously injured. In fact, that blow would have killed him if he hadn't transformed into the immortal Blood Emperor, a monstrous physique which was neither a human nor a demon. That blow had inflicted serious injuries to him, and it had also shaken his invincible confidence. After all, he hadn't disclosed his hidden trump, so he hadn't lost his confidence even when Yi Shiwen had cut him into two halves. However, the situation had changed now. He had displayed his strongest fighting strength. However, he had still sustained serious injuries at Yi Shiwen's hands. Moreover, he hadn't been able to inflict any injury to Yi Shiwen. Was he genuinely so powerful? This was the most unacceptable thing for him. He believed that he would be able to run amok the younger generation since he had practiced the Dark Spirit Blood Emperor power technique. He felt that it would be enough for him to break that bastard's neck in front of that old man. However, he couldn't even defeat Yi Shiwen, a man he hadn't even heard about. And this shock had made him numb. Why? Why has this happened? I'm invincible. The blood-red-clothed young master muttered in disbelief. Many experts became excited when they saw this scene from afar, especially those who hated the blood-red-clothed young master. They hadn't been able to voice their objections in the past because of this man's dominance. But they could finally hope for the dawn of a new era now. Yi Shiwen's formidable strength wasn't a good thing for them either. However, he wasn't like that blood-red-clothed young master, and he wouldn't kill everyone after he had captured a city. Yi Shiwen stepped forward and rushed forth. The divine golden cloak made him look aloof and indifferent. His invincible aura was similar to that of a mythical being. The strength could be improved. However, not everyone could possess such an incredible aura. He had gradually accumulated such an imposing aura and self-confidence after having defeated countless opponents. The blood-red-clothed young master's aura was initially similar to that of Yi Shiwen's. However, his had disappeared after this blow. Meanwhile, Yi Shiwen's had become even stronger. Yi Shiwen didn't give him any opportunity to respite and rushed towards him. It was hard to fully heal his chest, since Yi Shiwen's energy was coming in the way of the healing process. Consequently, his chest had been left to bleed. The blood-red-clothed young master shouted loudly. He wanted to counterattack. However, he had no strength left in him. His entire strength had been drained by now. Yi Shiwen arrived in front of him and raised him by the neck. Yi Shiwen, don't you dare kill me. My meteor sect's life sign token will break if I die. Then, everyone in the meteor sect will come to know that you have committed an offense, and you won't be able to escape. The blood-red-clothed young master looked fiercely at Yi Shiwen. He then burst into laughter as he said this. Don't dare to kill me. Bang! Yi Shiwen crushed that blood-red-clothed young master's body, and it exploded. To be continued. Chapter 487. The blood-red-clothed young master was assured that Yi Shiwen wouldn't dare to kill him. After all, the meteor sect had a formidable reputation. In fact, it was at the same level as the true martial university used to be in the past. The true martial university was still quite powerful. Experts were present in abundance just like clouds. However, it couldn't be compared with the true martial university of those glorious days. There was basically no comparison in that respect. In fact, the true martial university of the past was more powerful than the combined strength of the forces of the current true martial world. Therefore, one could imagine what kind of a force the meteor sect was. The people of the true martial university obviously wouldn't have cared about a young lord of the meteor sect if the true martial university were to be at the same level as before. However, the situation was different now. Therefore, the blood-red-clothed young master was confident that Yi Shiwen wouldn't dare to kill him. This was also his last resort. After all, he didn't have the option to escape after the death of that black-robed old man. Don't dare to kill me. Bang! Yi Shiwen crushed the body of the blood-red-clothed young master, and it exploded. He then pulled out his soul from his body and tossed it inside the heavenly source mirror. Yi Shiwen thought that it was the right thing to do. Yi Shiwen was wary of the meteor sect. After all, it wasn't inferior to a powerful force like the true martial university of the old times. However, it didn't mean that he would let this man off. He couldn't kill this man. So, he pulled out his soul and put it into the heavenly source mirror. And he intended to keep it there until the time when the meteor sect wouldn't be able to cause any trouble for him. Bang! A magical tool had swept out from the body of the blood-red-clothed young master at the time his body had transformed into blood fog. It was a sage tool. Therefore, it hadn't broken when Yi Shiwen had crushed his body. This divine, tool looked like a plate-shaped seal. It was blood red in color, and only one word was engraved on it: Emperor. Yi Shiwen searched the soul of the blood-red clothed young master and found out about a myriad of evil secrets. This divine tool was known as Blood Emperor Seal. He had refined it from the many precious materials he had collected. It could be said that this Blood Emperor Seal was the biggest wealth that he possessed. This secret divine tool and his dark spirit Blood Emperor power technique suited each other very well. However, he hadn't gotten enough time to unleash it. Otherwise, it would have displayed enormous power. Yi Shiwen naturally came to know about the dark spirit Blood Emperor power technique after he had searched this young master's soul. However, he wasn't interested in it. It wasn't that the dark spirit Blood Emperor power technique wasn't powerful. On the contrary, it was a very powerful technique. It might even be a power technique of some big force of the medieval era. Moreover, the blood-red-clothed young master hadn't even obtained it in its complete version. However, Yi Shiwen possessed the observing person scripture, so the other power techniques were like fleeting clouds for him. Moreover, the soul memories of the blood-red-clothed young master also told him that one must transform their body into the immortal body of Blood Emperor in order to practice this power technique to the peak. One might even get transformed into a person who'd be neither a ghost nor a demon. And Yi Shiwen didn't want that. However, he could learn a few things from it. For example, Yi Shiwen was quite envious of the ability which had enabled that blood-red-clothed young master to reorganize his body after he had been cut into two halves. His Phoenix regeneration technique was also quite incredible, and his gilded tyrant form was even more incredible. However, the consequences could be too disastrous if he were to be cut into two halves. Yi Shiwen tossed the Blood Emperor seal into the heavenly source mirror. However, something unexpected happened, and he was totally surprised by it. He had barely put that Blood Emperor seal into the heavenly source mirror when a big hand suddenly stretched out and grabbed it. Yi Shiwen was about to react when he heard Yi Mo's feeble voice. Yi Shiwen, don't attack. It's me, Yi Mo. Yi Shiwen promptly exposed a surprised look. He hadn't expected that he would sense Yi Mo's presence this time. Yi Shiwen hadn't felt Yi Mo's presence since the time Yi Mo had landed in a deep sleep. In fact, it was like Yi Mo had already disappeared for him. Moreover, he didn't have any method to sense Yi Mo since he wasn't responding. Therefore, he hadn't anticipated that he would finally sense Yi Mo at this time. Yi Mo, how are you? Yi Shiwen promptly spoke inside his consciousness. I'm fine, but I am too exhausted. I'm taking this divine tool. I must consume as many of these divine tools in order to recover. Yi Mo's voice still sounded weak as he said. Yi Mo hadn't attacked at that time. He had merely released his imposing aura to intimidate the enemy. However, he had exhausted most of his energy in doing that. In fact, nearly the entirety of his energy had depleted. It could be reckoned that he would have died if he were to be a human being. However, he was a tool spirit, so he had only fallen into deep sleep. Yi Shiwen knew that Yi Mo could be a match for sage experts as long as he had stimulated the heavenly source mirror to its full potential and had enough spirit stones for backup. However, he had fallen into deep sleep that day since he had revealed his imposing aura. Initially, he had seemed to be a match for that person. However, he hadn't responded for several years after that. That man was unimaginably dreadful. You will have to find many divine tools in the future. Only then can I recover quickly. Yi Mo disappeared again, he said this. And it soon seemed as if he hadn't ever appeared. Yi Shiwen became sluggish for a moment. This was a sage tool, and not some cabbage that anyone could own one. Most sage experts were still using pseudo-sage tools, and they too weren't easy to get a hold of. Several senior sage experts had arrived in the 10 countries of Southeast region at this time. However, they too were using pseudo-sage tools. Only the blood-red-clothed young master possessed a sage tool. However, Yi Shiwen grumbled at this thought. He would have some hope to find sage tools if he knew the way, even if it were to be difficult. Therefore, he was mostly troubled by the fact that he didn't have a direction to tread on. Consequently, He didn't know the direction in which he should put his efforts in. Sage tools were rare. However, he believed that it would become easier for him to get hold of sage tools along with the unceasing promotion of his cultivation. A long time had passed in Yi Shiwen's heart. However, it seemed as if an instant had passed in the outside world. Everyone was still immersed in the shock that Yi Shiwen had killed the blood-red-clothed young master. Yi Shiwen had certainly gained the upper hand from the beginning of the fight. However, gaining upper hand didn't mean that he could kill the opponent on his own. After all, the blood-red-clothed young master had long been famous. Therefore, those spectators were left in shock when they saw him getting killed. I didn't expect that the blood-red-clothed young master will die at Yi Shiwen's hands. Moreover, there wasn't any suspense in the fight, and he was defeated in such a direct manner. Yi Shiwen is extremely ferocious. Someone still couldn't believe that a sage expert had died before their eyes. A sage expert was like a god in the 10 countries of the southeast region. Therefore, killing a sage expert was akin to killing a god. And such an incident was bound to leave them stunned. The fate had been decided, and the dust had settled. The Great Qi State's 2 biggest benefactors had died in the battle. What could the remaining people possibly do now? There were many supporters of Qi State among those spectators. Many of them were also the experts of the Qi State. So, their complexion turned deathly pale when they saw this scene. In fact, it seemed as if they were mourning the loss of their mothers. Bang! Suddenly, boundless blood and energy broke out like tsunami waves from the place where the blood-red-clothed young master's body had exploded. The resentment and roars of countless people were mixed in that boundless blood and energy as it swept across. The scarlet flood swept out at an extremely fast speed. It had spread out in a flash. Yi Shiwen, Qi Fifan, and his teammates reacted very quickly, and they flew high up in the air almost immediately. However, some spectators weren't so lucky. Many among those were merely Truth Realm experts, and they turned into skeletons as they got flooded by this bloody flood. The loud screams began to reverberate unceasingly. Yi Shiwen had clearly seen that they hadn't been flooded and reduced into skeletons. Rather, they had been eaten alive and thus turned into skeletons. The number of resentful souls contained in that endless bloody flood wasn't clear. These resentful souls belonged to those innocent people who the blood-red-clothed young master had killed. Yi Shiwen didn't know that whether there were things like hell, reincarnation, and so on in this world or not. However, he knew that a resentment force would be generated if a person met a tragic death, and that force would linger around in the form of a resentful soul. This was general knowledge. The more tragic the death of a person, the more intense their resentful soul would be. And the people who had been killed by the blood-red-clothed young master were truly innocent. So, one could imagine how much hatred and resentment they must have possessed. Moreover, this was the resentful force which had been formed by the souls of many such innocent people. Even the sage experts would have to step away if they saw this. This was the reason an average person didn't dare to approach some large battlefields. They knew that there would be too many resentful souls in the vicinity. One wouldn't be worried if there were only 1 or 2 resentful souls. However, who wouldn't be scared if hundreds of thousands of such souls, or perhaps millions of such souls, rushed over towards them? Perhaps 10 million of such souls were present in this bloody flood. Those Truth Realm experts had only begun to touch upon the world principles. How they could have possibly resisted this force? The memory of the blood-red-clothed young master also informed Yi Shiwen that he would require a huge volume of people's essence and blood in order to practice the Dark Spirit Blood Emperor Power technique. Therefore, that man would frequently slaughter everyone in a city he had captured. He would attack and kill everyone in a city he had captured without any reason, since he wanted to obtain a huge volume of essence and blood to provide assistance to his cultivation of Dark Spirit Blood Emperor Power technique. The malicious nature of this power technique was evident from his fact. This was also one of the main reasons why Yi Shiwen didn't choose to practice the Dark Spirit Blood Emperor Power technique. This power technique looked quite good. The cultivation speed was also very quick. However, One must slaughter tens of millions of people if they wanted to practice this power technique till the sage realm alone. And they must kill even more people if they wanted to practice it further. It wasn't impossible. However, one would need to keep killing people until it was mastered. Not everyone who practiced evil technique resorted to indiscriminate killings. However, that wouldn't make one a powerful cultivator. Moreover, one would attract the attentions of countless people after they had slaughtered so many people. Most experts didn't pay attention to the ordinary people. However, these ordinary people were the very foundations of the big forces. The majority of disciples in a force came from ordinary background. So, a force wouldn't be very far from extinction if there were no ordinary people. Therefore, he might get chased down if he practiced the dark spirit blood emperor power technique. And Yishuan didn't want such a thing to happen. He was determined to kill only while facing an enemy and not indiscriminately. Moreover, who would control such destructive and overflowing flood after his death? It would create a huge mess. Moreover, he must be prepared to bear the entirety of these resentment forces if he wanted to practice the dark spirit blood power technique. One would get overpowered by these resentment force and lose to one's inner demons if one were to be careless. And then they would go crazy. The blood-red clothed young master had suppressed these essence and blood within his body with the help of Blood Emperor Seal. But Yishuan had taken away the Blood Emperor Seal after his death. So, all of it had suddenly broken out since the repression force had been removed. However, Yimo had already taken away the Blood Emperor Seal from him by now. Therefore, Yishuan had no choice but to clench his teeth as he saw the blood and energy rampaging as far as the eyes could see. He could only do that much. To be continued. That you're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.